All right, so welcome back to Foresight Paradigm. This is Paradigmatic Discussions, number 9, Why Atheism. I'm talking with Scott Gaines. Hey, Scott, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me on. How you been?
I'm pretty good. So this is going to be comprehensive responses to theist claims and why I take the label. It's kind of going to be bringing together like a lot of parts of my blogs and my book and notes and things of that nature, just to kind of get in one place, a really comprehensive breakdown of dismantling theism and also why atheism. Um, so I want to start with is these are kind of like over the years I've done like little paragraph summaries. Like if somebody asks me why are you an atheist, this will kind of be my summary, in short form. And gonna read these. All right, so I don't believe in any gods because number one, science provides alternate explanations that find and need no God that are actually backed by evidence. And science and its method of testing and doubting and conflict with the method of faith or religion, which are demonstrably unreliable ways to truth, has given us all the progress and knowledge we have that our whole world is built upon. Number two, there are many gods and religions incompatible with each other, which cause endless hatred and conflict, and along with much research, reveal the man made origins of religions and their holy books, full of contradictions and duplications and plagiarism of other man made religions. They are also all demonstrably factually incorrect about many things and require incessant cherry picking and reinterpretation to survive and ever lose their power and credibility, never proving any of their claims with the march of knowledge and progress. Number three, morally, religions have utterly disgusting doctrines like hell and support things like slavery and misogyny and blood sacrifice and genocide and grotesque rituals, showing they're not eternal or from any eternal deity, but the products of parochial customs of certain times and places. And they have horrible and embarrassing histories that, again, reveal their man made origins and maintenance. Number four, God is an unproven, dubious, ill defined word or concept that there is no good evidence for, that is not needed for wonder, happiness, purpose, morality, etc. Meanwhile, the universe is a completely indifferent place that we are very small in, with hurricanes and diseases randomly slaughtering children, regardless of their innocence or religion, and no God protecting anyone, with only human effort ever the active agent for bettering anything. Number five, Enlightenment ideals of cosmopolitanism and tolerance and humanism, basing laws on the betterment of this world and human flourishing, have worked and made the world a far better place. It's kind of a long paragraph, but the second one that I came up with, kind of shortening it a little more. Prayers are illogical and answered at the rate of chance. People of all religions and none are afflicted by misfortune equally. We are incidental and very small in an amoral and hospitable universe. All phenomena have turned out to have natural causes. Evolution shows that life, nor anything else, needs a conscious designer. A conscious designer adds to rather than solves complexity. There are many incompatible religions and sects, and they've spread largely through force, indoctrination, and historical accident. Religious texts have absurd, disproved, immoral, and contradictory claims and ideas. More and more of the greatest minds are non believers. Religions have never proved their claims or added knowledge, only excuses. The worst societies are the most religious. Religious history and ideas are horrific and anathema to unity and progress. Faith is not knowledge and is an unreliable means to truth. And then the last one, combine all the natural, godless explanations for the complexity of the world with their far greater evidence and explanatory power and backing of the actual experts, with the facts of the world that don't mesh with typical conceptions of and claims about a god, such as the randomly cruel world and the plurality, comical absurdity, and barbarism of religions that contradict a loving, active, wise being, with some of the logical issues with the idea of God itself, including that it would be infinitely more complex than the universe and be another astounding brute fact in need of explanation itself. And yes, my conclusion is that God is an extremely problematic hypothesis that I do not subscribe to or believe exists, at least not in any way that humans have imagined. Um, and so
No,
these again are the kind of the short paragraphs that I've done to
that's
kind of
very well said. I mean, this isn't
explain
something
my
that
atheism.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't something you can just say in 2 or 3 sentences. I mean, it's a lot to unpack, but I really like
Yeah.
uh, what you said about how it's just basically morally bankrupt, and it is literally just might makes right, and it's backed up by a sky dictator, or Hitchens called him what, a celestial dictator. I mean, that's really what it is.
Hmm. And heaven is like going to a celestial North Korea. Is that what he said?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what do you say? Like what comes to your mind immediately when somebody asks you, why are you an atheist? I remember the only time that I ever thought about atheism that I can recollect before, becoming an atheist was like, I think 2006 or so. And I think I was watching some kind of celebrity news thing, and uh, the celebrity was an atheist. And I remember thinking, okay, I get why you don't want to be religious, because I could see even then religions have problems. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but why would you be an atheist? Like, and subsequently I discovered why you would call yourself an atheist. But that's the only time I can remember. And then there's one other time. I think I kind of compared religion. I compared Genesis and evolution. I thought maybe how could they be true somehow? And I also took the ancient alien theory and thought maybe you can mix that in. Maybe we can find a way where all these things are true. Um,
That's a bit
those are
of kind of how
those are the
my
only
journey
sparse.
was.
Okay, what would you say when somebody asks you, hey Scott, why are you an atheist? Why would you be an atheist? What's wrong with you? Kind of like what's
Yeah,
his
I
name?
get that a lot.
That
I mean,
governor
the main.
John Kasich. John Kasich, a pretty reasonable Republican. I was talking about Daniel Radcliffe, the actor from Harry Potter. He's like
Mhm.
he's a great guy and he does share. What's wrong with him? Why is he an atheist? Um, so what's wrong with you, Scott? Why are you an atheist?
Well, there's a whole
Basically.
lot. Like my main reason, and this is actually how I came to be one, is when I was in high school, I was a young Earth creationist my freshman and most of my sophomore year. And basically, I knew just enough science to get hustled. And so once my scientific literacy improved from my searching for, like you said, of trying to see if Genesis and evolution were compatible, because I was desperately trying to see if they were compatible. Because all the science books I kept ordering off of Amazon.com on dial up internet, it's been that long ago, just kept slapping me in the face with things that I didn't like. And I remember reading it and getting upset. And so that's the first sort of step, is that to become one, most of the time, I would say, if you're doing it in a reasonable way, it has to be, you have to want to seek the truth. And in doing that, you have to follow the evidence wherever it leads. Now, another reason I am one is because this God, like the most popular one here where we live in the Bible Belt, is the God of Abraham, and it is morally bankrupt. Might
Right.
makes right. Terrifying children with hell is just, something I never want to do, because I really do believe it is mental child abuse. But I would say this lack of evidence, the immorality of it, the absurdity of it, none of the divine claims have any evidence. Israeli archeology has never found anything. I mean, the list goes on and on, but those are the main ones for me that seem kind of like knockout blows. You would think they would have found something in Israel by now.
Yeah. Yeah. The book and the miniseries "The Bible on Earth" is really great. I mean, Israel Finkelstein wrote the book and did the documentary, and did the research along with another guy. I don't remember his name, and he kind of had a motive to want to find. He's Jewish. He had a motive
Very
to
much.
want to find, some evidence. And I have some
Mm-hmm.
quotes from him later on in kind of the biblical
Oh,
section
okay.
of this
Yeah.
presentation. And that book really shows with a lot of evidence. There is no good evidence for so much in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah,
And it's kind of like this, like, when I stepped out in science, I was trying to reinforce my God. And a lot of believers have this really weird view that science is trying to disprove God. And that's not the case at all. This idea of God that most people have is not necessary to conduct good science. In fact, it would destroy good science if you were to pray in the laboratory instead of doing the work.
right. Well, moving on to definitions. So My mouse over here. Yeah, so we're all agnostic, which pertains to knowledge. There is no good evidence that anyone has any certain knowledge of anything divine. When it comes to belief, I say I'm an atheist. The word comes from the Greek atheos, which means without God. I'm unconvinced any gods exist. I think the God hypothesis is full of holes, including that it's an ill defined term used in different ways, referring to different things, beings that are incoherent, unseen, and undemonstrated. I also use the label atheist for reasons of unity and affecting political change, and for expressing in no uncertain terms my disdain for religion. I dislike religion for the same reasons I dislike Nazism, and I disbelieve it for the same reasons I disbelieve in ghosts. So with the Nazis, we had people dressing up and doing this cultish stuff and harming people based off of their unsupported beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
With ghosts, it's talking about inference to the best explanation. If there's some strange occurrence or whatever, how is a complete other realm that's never been the answer for anything, never been demonstrated, the best explanation, right? Um,
I know.
yeah, and so I sometimes experience near despair that we have not moved beyond it when I see pastors and cardinals dressed up like clowns performing rituals, speaking to often childlike audiences, spewing ancient desert and medieval nonsense. Its valid insights and beneficial elements are awash in ignorance, false diagnoses, and tribalism. It preaches duty to an invisible tyrant, master, and not real humanity, to a hypothesized other world and not the only world we know we have. It preaches faith, not good reasons. However, my spirits are lifted when I remember how much progress we've made, as with so many other things, beyond any point in history. So, for you, Scott, what is your what how do you define atheism, or do you call yourself an agnostic also, or because I do too, because it's two different realms. Like many people have pointed this
Yes.
out, but go ahead.
Well, if I'm saying what I can know for sure, I would have to say agnosticism is the best choice because we cannot disprove that any of these thousands of choices of God or goddesses or just deity in general don't exist. But that's no good reason to start inserting them into places. But I think what I would call myself as far as what I believe, and this belief I hold with as much conviction probably as any religious person, but I'm willing to change my mind with actual evidence. But I believe that all gods, as described or presented by humans, have no shot of existing, just looking at the state of this world versus what they claim. No God of love could bring us into this universe where there are literally uh, other living organisms whose sole purpose to be here is to harm us, burrow into us, use us as a host in some gross, disgusting way. The classic one most people use
David Attenborough,
is burrow
he
into your
does.
child's eyes. I think that's the one him and Stephen
Yeah, he's
Fry.
the guy that does the BBC animal
Yes.
stuff, and he was asked about that, and he because he goes out and he sees it in detail in
Oh
nature,
yeah.
and yeah, he's the one that pointed that out. That's where I remember that from. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like you said here. It preaches a duty to an invisible tyrant master. I, don't let anybody tell me what to do without a good reason. So if you notice what this God wants us to do is always told to us by another primate mammal. If this God really had something to say, I think he would choose a much better way of going about it. But
Right.
I call myself a strident atheist, a militant one when necessary. And I truly believe the world will be a better place with it, at least without the Abrahamic faith, for sure. But Hinduism has its own problems as well. That's sort of the
Yeah.
main ones that have real power here.
Yeah. As I pointed out, there are beneficial aspects to it, and there's valid insights in them. I would hope there would be. Um, but again, they're awash in tribalism, ignorance, false diagnoses. Um, yeah. Can you hear me all right? See me all right?
Your voice is starting to break up there, right there in that last sentence, kind of dragging a little bit.
Can you hear me pretty good now?
Yeah, you sound good now.
Okay. Just let me know if it starts, messing up. I might have to hardwire. All right.
Okay.
So moving on. Why is there something rather than nothing? Uh, First, the fact is there may have to be something. Something may be a more natural state than nothing. pure nothingness is hypothetical and its possibility undemonstrated. Nothing in terms of empty space has been shown to be unstable and is full of potential something, and energy and particles and gravity and evolution are natural sculptors, even amidst entropy. Entropy, or increasing disorder, applies to closed systems, which our planet is not, and our universe may not be. Regardless, we can have pockets of order amidst an overall disorder. And so, while we may not have all the answers to this question, one could just as easily ask where God comes from or why is there a God? If a God could always have existed, why can't the universe have always existed? Except we have much clearer and greater evidence for the universe. A God would be the ultimate Boeing 747, infinitely more complex than the universe. And of course, the Boeing 747 argument
Mm-hmm.
used by people that misconstrue evolution. It's saying evolution is like a tornado that went through a junkyard and assembled a Boeing 747,
Yeah.
which is completely misconstruing. Natural selection is not random; it's non-random. Mutations are random, and it's like people use the example of monkeys on a typewriter. Could they ever type a line of Shakespeare? Well, if they preserved the correct letters and got rid of the errors, eventually, yeah, they could get to something. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but anyway, everything we have come to understand in this universe has had a purely natural, material, mindless cause and process that explain our universe well and require no outside assistance. Which horse are you going to bet on? With the one that's naturalism that's been everything, or you know, one that's never won any race.
Yeah.
Um, so, meanwhile, theists invoke magical or unknown operations through which God exists and operates, which have never been demonstrated any more than God itself. All we have from theists are claims and assertions. Big Bang cosmology, evidenced by things like the red light shift, which shows the moving away, microwave background, etc., tell us that our visible local universe used to be very small. Not that the universe started there from nothing. It could have always existed like that. Matter and energy are interchangeable, and energy could be eternal as well could be the quantum foam. We could go through cycles of eternal expansions and collapses per a lot of Eastern mythological ideas. Or it could have been a phase transition from another universe. Our universe could have been a quantum fluctuation birthed from another universe that's part of an eternal multiverse. We don't know if the universe began. We don't know that everything that begins to exist has a cause. See quantum physics. Um, and we covered some of this stuff in our podcast on cosmology months back. Uh, but in
Yes.
quantum physics, you have matter and antimatter. That they antimatter is real, by the way, and like that's what they in Star Trek they use antimatter to power the warp vessels, but it's a
Mm-hmm.
real thing, and antimatter cancels out matter, and so they can put a particle of antimatter against a particle of matter, and they'll annihilate each other, and then they'll reappear again from apparently nothing. Virtual particles seem to pop in and out of existence with no apparent cause. Um, the decay rate of certain things like isotopic decay rate, like electrons emit photons. These things have no apparent causes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Also, we have things like quantum entanglement. That particles far away seem to affect each other. All kinds of quantum weirdness that again challenge this, and so do other things. Um, but anyway, so if the universe began to exist, it may have a cause or not. Causes occur within the universe on human level scales. Causes, goals, even time seem to play no part on the subatomic quantum scale, the most fundamental level of reality. And things in the universe don't necessarily apply to the universe itself. If it did have a cause, the cause likely would be natural. And again, one can't posit an entire other unproven realm that's never been demonstrated, never been the cause behind anything, and say that it's the likeliest explanation. So, um, yeah, I mean, I think that covers it.
Oh yeah. And I mean, the
If you
thing
have
is,
anything to add to it.
I mean, the only thing I can think to add is that, like, if anybody's watching this and they want to know how to kind of argue with a theist better about this, is just most of the time when people talk about this universe, they imagine it has some order, and they don't understand that our planet could be many miles, in their view, they say to the left or the right or further or closer to the sun, and still there would be some life here. It might not be us, but something would arise here. It's like you said about evolution. just whatever the planet can allow to happen is going to happen. And how can anyone think that inserting a God into this equation here is an answer? It's like you said earlier, it adds more questions. It doesn't answer any.
No. And the disorder needs to be accounted for the same as order, by the way. Fine tuning. I get my mouse over here. There we go. This is I've heard several people say that, theists, this is their best argument, even though it's still a bad argument.
Oh, it's so bad.
So, okay, whether it's a universe indicated by inflation or the many worlds interpretation of quantum physics, the multiverse is where science seems headed, with many physicists subscribing to some form of it. There have even been impact circles in the microwave background that has been speculated could be impacts from another universe. And though the multiverse does invalidate so-called fine-tuning arguments, there's plenty more left to address it. Because obviously, the multiverse, if there's many universes with many laws of physics, then that obviously we're just one in many. We're microscopically small in time and space. Via the Copernican principle, we continue to have our imagined importance and centrality in the universe refuted. The universe is actually, it's not really fine-tuned. It's mostly lethal and inhospitable to known life. Imagine a house being built for the purpose of a feeble electron within that house. It's actually even worse than that, to say the universe is made for us. The parameters of the universe may have to be what they are. There may be things we're yet to understand about them. One could point out a person's family history consists of many random meetings and sperm-egg combinations, but that doesn't mean they all happen just so that person can be here. There are many planets in the Goldilocks zones of many billions of solar systems. No miracle. 99% of life on this planet has gone extinct. And for most of the history of our Earth, there was only simple single-cell life. What was God waiting on? And why did he create dinosaurs for millions of years and then wipe them out? I'm actually watching a really, really good season of Star Trek Enterprise right now that I didn't pay attention to before, and now I think it's one of the best of the entire the franchise. And it's it was done like as an allegory to 9/11. So there's like this big sphere that comes and like shoots down this laser on Earth, this big line that kills 7 million people from Florida to Venezuela, and they have to launch this mission into this weird part of space to find the people that did it. And the people turn out to be the Zindi, who are this they're like different species that evolved intelligence on the same planet. So imagine if birds evolved to have the same size of brains that we do, and insects and aquatic animals and other primates. Forget just other hominids like Homo erectus or Neanderthals or whatever. Imagine that we had all these different kinds of life that evolved our level of intelligence, and we're existing. That's what the Zindi are. That idea. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is really
so
cool. So
imagine that. But that didn't happen. I got wiped out. What's that?
I said, yeah, that would be really.
Repeat that.
Can you hear me? I said that would be really cool if that happened.
Yeah, I can hear you. So where was I at?
Oh, like all the different.
God. Oh. Yeah. The universe is always trying to kill us. Many things in our bodily designs via evolution harm us. A God would not need fine tuning. You think about prostates in men, and about how the I forget the name of it, that long thing that has this takes this huge detour around men's bodies that give them problems. And there's many examples you can point to like that. But yeah, the theist explanation is one among many, and makes extraordinary claims without even ordinary evidence, really. We don't have any universes to compare ours to speak of the likelihood of its conditions. There may be many kinds of life that can survive in other conditions apart from ours. That's another thing we think about, only our life, but who knows what type of life could be possible. And,
yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to all be carbon-based. Yeah, it could be tons of things.
Right. The parameters of particles seem to be random and a mess, and there are many settings that don't have any relevance to life, which is another big point.
Yeah, that's a great point to make, yeah.
This mind-creating universes and consciousness. So This is a quote of David Hume from his book, The Dialogue Concerning Natural Religion from 1776. And he has a character say, what peculiar privilege has this little agitation of the brain, which we call thought, that we must thus make it the model of the whole universe, right? So
That self-projecting.
that speaks to us projecting, our anthropomorphizing the universe based on us, based on what our how we operate. Um, so all thought we know of occurs in brains. We know of no consciousness without a physical substrate. Further, we know that when you're tired, your consciousness is altered, and that when a part of your brain corresponding to a certain function is damaged, say facial recognition, that function is damaged or gone. The brain is very malleable. Your personality can be altered easily. The immaterial soul can be bisected with a knife and altered by chemicals, blows, electricity, or lack of oxygen. We can see brain activity lit up in machines. It seems consciousness, though we don't understand subjective experience completely, is an emergent property of the material. It's neuron firing. We can see the different levels of the brain and how they evolved. A good book by Carl Sagan is, I think, his first book called the Dragons of Eden. He does a good job of like laying out how we have the reptilian brain. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. The reptilian brain is kind of like the base, like the brain stem, and like automatic stuff like sweating and respiration. And then there's the middle brain, which includes like the amygdala, fight or flight, and some of the like the bonding mother uh, children emotions, hormones, chemicals, and then we have the newest, the most human part, like the prefrontal cortex, things, the reasoning, all the most advanced parts of the brains for humans. Um, and we can look at other animals, like look at a fish. I don't think they have a cerebral cortex at all. Uh,
Yeah, like it
anyway,
varies. And I mean, even some like, animals that are similar to us have empathy and care about each other. Why did God give that to them if they're, don't even have to worry about sin? It just makes no sense.
that's true, and if that's true, and if we suffer because of Adam and Eve, well, what did the animals do to deserve it? I mean, what is their original sin, right? Um, does it really yeah, does it really make sense? A supermind was alone in what space and bored forever, and then for some reason one day created an experiment to lord over and play hide and seek with. Doesn't it make more sense that a universe came first and minds are things that evolve in universes?
Yeah, you would
Kind of how
think so.
science shows, right?
If this God is real, he's more of a prankster than Q
Yeah.
from Star Trek.
Yeah, really. Much worse than Q, I would say.
Much
Um,
worse.
so evolution. Contrary to popular belief, people were observing nature and entertaining evolutionary ideas for many, many centuries. Since Darwin, the evidence has become overwhelming from a convergence of a vast array of fields. We have the fossil record, which shows simple life at the bottom, more complex life at the top. Despite fossils being rare, just because of how rare it is that you get a fossil, many have been found and always show the same transition history. We have never found rabbit fossils in the Precambrian or humans with dinosaurs. So we continue to find fossils, including transitional ones like Tiktaalik, that kind of shows like where like aquatic animals started kind of like having fins as things that could like walk on land, things like that.
Getting those extra.
Where they're predicted to be found. Yeah, they keep finding them where they predict they're going to find them. Like I read, been reading some evolution books lately. There's this one example of they found they predicted they should find some kangaroo fossils in Antarctica, and they did because they were trying to figure out some pattern that. But I mean, those examples are abundant. I mean, so we have many forms of dating that corroborate our evolutionary timescales. And this is not all of them, but tree rings, ice cores, carbon dating, potassium, argon, other kinds of radiometric dating, the speed of light from stars. We have the genetic evidence showing all of life's relatedness and the time when different branches diverged. We have junk DNA. So we have a lot of our DNA that doesn't even do anything. That's just junk. We have vestigial structures, the appendix, for example. We have comparative anatomy and a host of evidence from all fields that converge to show evolution, and examples that reflect the process of non-random natural selection and random mutation, which has to work unconsciously and blindly, has to work with what's already there. It can't start over. It doesn't have foresight or plan. And we see that constantly in the natural world. Um, Also, we have examples like Goosebumps and Hiccups that have been explained. Like Goosebumps are a remnant of like what some animals still have, where their hair stand up, where they want to insulate themselves, or they want to look like or they're like running from a predator or something. They want to be look bigger.
Mm-hmm.
We can also look at embryology, and we can see the transformation from a little bundle of cells to an adult. Give you a good mental image that you can really think about, grasp. Um, yeah, look at that. And
Mm-hmm.
it kind of seems like there's a I mean, this is questionable, but it does seem like it recapitulates evolutionary history. Embryos from all vertebrates, I believe, look almost identical. And humans have like gill slits and tail and a coat of fur when they're really small embryos.
Yes.
Um, it's ironic that the deniers of evolution can't demonstrate God at all, but want to chastise our inability to see huge changes right in front of us that usually take enormous scales that we can't even comprehend. Talking geological scales, deep time. Um, Also, historical science has no separate distinction in science, as creationists want to say. Excluding evolution on that basis, we would have to exclude many sciences, like astronomy, forensic science, where you go to a scene, you weren't there, and you put things together. Also, geology and other fields. But all of these, we can't go into a lab, but we can observe, we can gather data, we can hypothesize, we can test, we can make predictions. And no one would have been there if and when a God created things either, by the way. The
Mm-hmm.
Bible is man made, demonstrably. The evidence science has uncovered is not. God or intelligent design gets us no data collection, no testable theories, no predictions, no work of its own. It has been defeated in courts by Christians. See the Dover trial in 2005, the scientist Kenneth Miller and the judge that Bush appointed. I actually have the quote from him. If you pull it up.
Yeah, when a
Let's
Bush
see.
judge is not siding with the Lord, the Christians may want to listen.
Yeah, yeah, maybe. Yeah, so I have a quote from his conclusion. He said, "We find that the secular purpose claimed by the board amount to a pretext for the board's real purpose, which was to promote religion in the public school classroom. It singles
Yeah.
out the theory of evolution for special treatment. It misrepresents its status in the scientific community. It causes students to doubt its validity without scientific justification." Um, oh, my notes just disappeared. Hold on. Give me 1 second. My notes just disappeared. If you have anything to add to that, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, that's perfect. And the fact that it's been defeated in courts by the religious for a long time. I mean, there's that famous movie Inherit the Wind, which is a black and white movie talking about the monkey trial in Tennessee. It's a great
Right.
play. It's a great movie. It's a great thing to go and just check out on Wikipedia if you're bored one day. It's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. That was the Scopes monkey trial
Mm-hmm. Scopes, that's it.
in
Yeah.
Tennessee. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so he said, yeah, it misrepresents its status in the scientific community. It causes students to doubt its validity without scientific justification. It presents students with a religious alternative masquerading as a scientific theory. It discredits them to consult a creationist text as though it were a science resource and instructs students to forego scientific inquiry in the public school classroom and instead to seek out religious instruction elsewhere. The judge Jones decried the breathtaking inanity of the Dover policy and accused several boys of lying to conceal their true motive, which he said was to promote religion. Six weeks trial over the issue yielded overwhelming evidence establishing that intelligent design is a religious view, a mere relabeling of creationism, and not a scientific theory. And another pretty famous thing that happened in that trial is they kept trying to bring out examples of irreducible complexity, and like they would bring out like a one creationist book, and the scientists there, the legitimate ones, even including even the Christians like Kenneth Miller, they brought out these huge stacks of books compared to like their like one or two little books, showing
Mm-hmm.
how like the flagellum in bacteria, that's like kind of like this little motor that
Oh.
it's not irreducibly complex, and like blood clotting and other things.
Or the eyeballs, the classic one. Like Ken Ham
Yeah,
tries to say the eye is a perfect design of a perfect creator while he's wearing glasses.
right. And they
This
try to say what's
is
the use of
wearing
half of a wing,
glasses.
right? And they try to say what's the use of half a wing? Well, it's better than no wing. I mean, also, not only can they have they can like I think eyes or it started like in little like small like worm animals or something as like light sensitive like slits, right? Or like kind of dents in the animal. And being able to sense light at all is better than not being able to, you know?
Like there's
Um,
one that a lot of them have tried to use, and it's like the lightning bug, or there's this another type of bug that like emits a small flame or some kind of poison from itself, and they try to say, well, if it messes up even a little bit in the evolution of it, it wouldn't be able to be here now. And I'm like, well, when things breed and go about, it's not just one at a time. It's not like Frankenstein in his lab with one little thing. Bugs usually reproduce in, hundreds of thousands, and it just takes time. It's just whatever survives long enough to do it again. It's not chosen, it's not special. It's just really is that random.
yeah. Also, you can have something that used to serve another purpose that now doesn't serve that purpose.
Like for
You know,
us, the appendix you mentioned earlier now is a threat to us. Before
right?
we had ambulances to get us to that hospital, and before that hospital was good enough to get that appendix out, how many of God's chosen creation to have dominion here died from their own God's obviously not intelligent design?
Yeah. This is a an example of people getting the logic of evolution even before Darwin. Um, so yeah, and I wrote a blog called Atheist Before Darwin because
Mm-hmm.
Richard Dawkins says in his book The Blind Watchmaker, I couldn't imagine being an atheist before Darwin, but actually people had ideas of evolution going back to ancient Greece, and there were prominent atheists before Darwin.
Oh yeah.
So and this is from Percy Bysshe Shelley from A Refutation of Deism in 1814. That's way before Darwin published. I guess he was, I don't know if he was out on doing his Beagle voyage around the world at that time. I don't remember. Um,
I'm not
but many
sure.
decades before the origin of species.
Mm-hmm.
So design must be proved before a designer can be inferred. The analogy between the contrivances of human art, like machines like watches that humans create, and the various existences of the universe is inadmissible. We attribute these effects to human intelligence because we know beforehand that human intelligence is capable of producing them. And we already know, we see people making watches, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, our entire ignorance, therefore, of the divine nature leaves this analogy defective in its most essential point of comparison. If whatever exists producing certain effects stands in need of a creator, and the more conspicuous is its fitness for the production of these effects, the more certain our conclusion that it must have derived its origin from an intelligent creator. In what respect, then, do these arguments apply to the universe and not apply to God? If we find great difficulty from its admirable arrangement in conceiving that the universe has existed from all eternity, and to resolve this difficulty suppose a creator, how much more clearly must we perceive the necessity of this very creator's creation, whose perfections comprehend an arrangement far more accurate and just? The belief of an infinity of creative and creative gods, each more eminently requiring an intelligent author of his being than the foregoing, is a direct consequence of the premises stated. It by no means follows that because a being exists performing certain functions, he was fitted by another being to the performance of these functions. That certain animals exist in certain climates results from the constituency of their frames to the circumstances of their situation. Let these circumstances be altered to a sufficient degree, and the elements of their composition must exist in some new combination, no less resulting than the former from those inevitable laws by which the universe is governed. Inasmuch as the order visible in the universe requires one cause, so does the disorder whose operation is not less clearly apparent demand another. The laws of attraction and repulsion, desire and aversion suffice to account for every phenomenon of the moral and physical world. To suppose some existence beyond or above them is to invent a second and superfluous hypothesis to account for what has already been accounted for, requiring its own hypotheses to account for its own contradictions. There is no attribute of God which is not either borrowed from the passions and powers of the human mind, or which is not, it is not a negation. So,
Man, that's really good.
yeah, it's a little wordy, and you can kind of get you know lost for a second with this train of thought. You find a lot of writing from that time, kind of is like that. But yeah, it is
Hmm.
very good, and this is again before Darwin, and this is another one that I know you're familiar with from Diderot, Letter on the Blind,
Yes.
1749. He got thrown in prison for this one. Uh,
Hmm.
Letter on the Blind was actually it was talking about the idea of sensation of like if a blind person could suddenly see, would he see things the same, or if you could describe the color to him and he'd never seen it before, things like that.
Yes, and
But
this
anyway,
also was like this was Diderot's first real sort of strident writing, because he had one before where it was what like theism and atheism kind of talked, but there was no real conclusion, no winner. And in this one, the
yeah.
blind guy wins hard. I mean, he wins big.
So his first one was called the Philosophical Thoughts, and
That's it.
he that one was technically his when he was still a deist, which he remained for a short time. But
Hmm.
if you read it, it's kind of got a lot of strong atheist points in it too, and it's kind of
Oh
like
yeah.
you can see he's kind of like it's not so clear. And then his next one is called A Skeptic's Walk, and it's got like a pantheist, an atheist, a theist, and they're like all, and it's kind of like using like this metaphorical place um, to have these dialogue between these
Yeah,
characters.
that's the one I'm
And
thinking of.
I really enjoyed that one, and kind of the
Hmm.
Spinozist, the kind of atheist pantheist kind of wins that one because he was portraying the atheist one and that one as kind of being like a Lemaitre type or a what's his name Marquis de Sade, like a completely amoral character.
Yeah, sort of the
And the
cliche
atheist,
time. Yeah.
yeah. So the quote is, "What if I told you if we went back to the origin of things, we should meet a number of shapeless creatures instead of creatures highly organized? That all the defective combinations of matter disappeared, and only those whose mechanism was not defective in any important particular and who were able to support and perpetuate themselves survived. The order now even is not so perfect as to exclude monstrosities. What if in remote regions of space worlds are formed and dispersed and formed again, where motion continually combines masses of matter until some arrangement is found in which it may persevere? If nature offers us a knotty problem, let's not call in to cut the hand of a being who immediately becomes a fresh knot and harder to untie than the first. I would say to the Indian as to you, drop the elephant supporting the world and the tortoise supposedly supporting it and confess your ignorance."
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. And 1749 is when it was published. So I'm guessing a year or two before he had written that. I mean, that is just unbelievable. And that part about
Um,
mass swirling together and pulling each other apart. I mean, that is, 200 years really before we even got into that.
yeah. Tomorrow we're going to be doing iconic atheists, and Diderot is going to be, I think, the first figure, and it's kind of going to be getting pretty deep into him and Dolbach.
Oh, he's a legend.
Um, yeah, he predicted genetic engineering 200 years before Dolly the sheep was cloned, and he, of course,
Wow.
natural selection 100 years before Darwin, and several things. And there's even one part actually from the book Diderot and the Art of Thinking Freely, which I think we both read.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an interview with the author Andrew Karan on my channel months ago.
Yeah, he's great.
He he has a letter to Sophie Voland, his lover and kind of intellectual equal. He's kind of like taking solace in his atheist materialist outlook, and he's saying, "I want us to be buried together so that maybe our atoms can find each other and become one being." He was kind of
Beautiful.
extrapolating
Right?
what he didn't know a little bit, but you know, That's kind of cool if you think about it.
Well, it's a cool thought too that if you're a fan of a certain musician who lived during your time or at least a little bit before you, it's probably, some atoms in your body may be from them, or you've breathed them in and out. So if
Yeah.
you're thinking about your favorite musician in a weird way, think about it like that.
Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about that, how there's because of the number of atoms, we're probably breathing in Shakespeare and you know, which is
Could
yeah, it's a
be.
cool
Yeah.
thought.
Hey,
Okay,
before we get to this one, sorry,
sure.
just like edit this. Like the last one had this weird, like kind of drag, and then it had like a whistle sound that came in at one random point. But it was when you were not speaking. It was in the middle of a word. You may be able to edit it out. Just letting you know. I don't know what
Mm,
it calls that.
Okay, does it sound all right now?
Yeah, yeah, sounds good now.
Okay. Did it last like just a second or
Yeah, I mean it wasn't very long.
okay. All right, so scientism. Show me something comparable to science, right?
Yeah, good luck with
The
that.
most reliable tool we've ever had that our whole world is built on it. Okay? Bring it on.
And the people that like to rail against it on the internet wouldn't be able to do it without it.
Right, 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 right. Yeah. So science is the only thing that gives us reliable, objective, verifiable knowledge about the world. Our whole world built on its validity and efficacy. Science is by far the best and most consistent tool we have for reaching truth about anything. It's overtaken religion as the authority on virtually every topic, while the reverse has never happened. Just because we don't know everything is no reason to invent explanations or insert one based on unsupported religious claims. I have a notification. Alrighty. Um, Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence or an extreme and unambiguous amount of solid evidence. What can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Faith is not a reliable means to knowledge. Doubt, which leads to investigation, is. Doubt is the beginning of wisdom. Faith can and does take you anywhere, to 1,000 contradictory places. What can you not believe on faith? Consider, people prayed and performed rituals for thousands of years and kept dying at 30 or in childbirth. This did not change until modern science because science actually accurately identified reality and was thus able to change it. Science does keep progressing, but only science has ever disproved science, and science usually builds upon what has come before. It does not discard it. For example, Newtonian physics is still what gets us to the moon, valid in its domain, despite the coming of relativity, the modern theory of gravity from Einstein, and quantum physics. Again, every phenomenon we've discovered has had only mindless physics naturalism behind it. The horse has won every race. The supernatural has never, ever been shown to exist despite incessant attempts. Um, science and comparing science and religion, right? Science
Mhm.
is about truth, not the maintenance of dogma like religion is. Science has no unquestionable, infallible leaders, unlike religion. Science is self questioning and self corrective, unlike religion. Science requires no faith, it's backed by evidence. Its truths are there for all to see and verify, demonstrable, unlike religion. Science needs no and makes no threats to force belief or acceptance, unlike religion. Science unites humanity, unlike religion. The scientific method and mindset are antithetical to bias and secrecy, unlike religion. The values of science and democracy, free inquiry, critical thought, debate, being evidence based and open to change and experiment and criticism are nearly interchangeable, born in their civilized form in the same place and time in classical Greece with the Ionians. Religions are diametrically opposed and mutually exclusive in their dogmas, and even those of the same religion wage war and can't agree. Odd if we have the word of God, the wisest and clearest product ever written before us. Science is universal and works the same for anyone, anywhere. Science works, unlike religion. Science has uncovered everything we know and has utterly propelled and transformed the world in every way, unlike religion, which has failed to really better the world or people's lives or to uncover or advance anything in all its centuries of hegemony. The gods inspired people to build great monuments, but science inspired and enabled people to build monuments immensely greater and immensely more useful. For example, the International Space Station, the CERN Hadron Collider, etc. Science actually makes accurate predictions or prophecies because they're based in actual knowledge and evidence, unlike religion. The observations of science and the evidence it uncovers are not man-made. Religions, which are made by us, are. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, man, I think you pretty much nailed it on that one. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
very obvious that having evidence usually works out better for you.
Right. Yeah. So what science keeps telling us is things are bottom up and evolutionary, from life to the mindless formation of stars, solar systems, and planets. No theory or finding of science includes God. Science finds and needs no God to explain anything. Again, further faith is a very unreliable path of truth, leading to multiple contradictory and unresolvable conclusions. What can you not believe on faith? Faith is a poison to the enterprise of systematic doubt that is science, the enterprise that is unlike religion. I guess repeating myself here, but for its millennia of hegemony really does improve people's lives with justified hope, health, and opportunity. That enterprise that has actually made progress and has reliable and verifiable means to keep making it. The enterprise that has actually uncovered facts about the world and substantiated its claims. Let's continue that noble quest. And then I have a quote from Sean Carroll here from The Big Picture. And this is touching on people that say, I think you mentioned this, alluded to this, that science just doesn't want to consider the supernatural, like where the scientists are biased and dogmatic, for
Or
naturalism.
whatever the
Yeah.
claim is. Yeah.
So Carroll says it's not that science presumes naturalism, it's that science has provisionally concluded that naturalism is the best picture of the world. That's the direction it's gone for hundreds of years, as we've gotten more knowledge. The progress of modern physics and cosmology has sent a fairly unequivocal message. There's nothing wrong with the universe existing without any external help. We don't know whether our universe had a beginning or not, but objects can move and tend to do so without any need for an external cause or mover. In both physics and biology, complexity often emerges in a hierarchical fashion. Small pieces conglomerate into larger units, which then conglomerate into even larger ones. Networks are built up that exhibit complex overall behavior emerging from simple underlying rules. The appearance of complexity isn't just compatible with increasing entropy, it relies on it. We are ephemeral patterns of complexity riding a wave of entropy. We should enjoy the ride.
Wow, that's beautiful. And it's so true because he said
I
something
thought so.
too that I think relates. He said we should stop thinking of the Big Bang as the beginning of time and think of it as the end of our understanding. And it's like, look, man,
Right.
we don't know how this all started. No one does. I don't know is the most honest and most intellectual position to be at right now. And that terrifies so many people. And it's because of, in my opinion, religious indoctrination. Because if you're taught that you will be punished for not believing this, it makes it really hard to give that belief up, especially when the people you trust the most, your parents and family, have that belief.
Right. So, got some quotes here. On scientific progress, validating a secular or atheistic view of reality. The age of the earth, the origins of humans, the nature of life, the size of the universe has undermined factual claims of scripture. It has presented a picture of the laws of nature that allow no place for any kind of goal, purpose, teleology, or concern with human affairs. The idea that life required some divine spark was undermined first by Darwin, then by Watson and Crick. The idea that there is an immaterial soul is becoming less and less tenable. Supernatural explanations have been crowded out. It's from Pinker. And then this quote is from Jerry Coyne, who has a whole book talking about the conflict of science and religion. Some people like to accommodate them, like Stephen Jay Gould, the late evolutionary scientist. He had NOMA, non-overlapping magisteria, like that religion pertains to ethics and science pertains to the natural world, which of course is BS. They overlap, and religion makes way more claims than just about ethics, and ethics or human
Oh,
nature falls in the domain of science. It's an empirical study too.
yeah.
But Yeah, so this quote is on the compatibility of science and religion. Faith may be religion, but in science it's a poison, for faith is no way to find truth. The toolkit of science based on reason and empirical study is reliable, while that of religion, including faith, dogma, and revelation, is unreliable and leads to incorrect, untestable, or contradicting conclusions. By relying on faith rather than evidence, religion renders itself incapable of finding truth. While scientific investigations converge on solutions, religious investigations diverge, producing numerous sects with conflicting and irresolvable claims. Religion remains the only mode of discourse that encourages grown men and women to pretend to know things they manifestly do not and cannot know. If ever there was an attitude at odds with science, this is it. Science and religion, unlike, say, business and religion, are competitors at discovering truths about nature. And science is the only field that has the ability to disprove the truth of claims of religion and has done so repeatedly. Religion, on the other hand, has no ability to overturn the truths found by science. It is this competition and the ability of science to erode the hegemony of faith, but not vice versa, that has produced a copious discussion of how the two areas relate to each other and how to find harmony between them. Um, this is a good quote from Robert G. Ingersoll, who was a great agnostic orator toward the end of the 19th century. He's largely forgotten now, but a lot of people came to like see him talk, and he was very, very popular. He could have ran possibly for office. I think he was a politician of some kind.
Yeah, it was locally. I'm pretty sure if I remember, I like something in his city. Yeah.
But people like Thomas Edison and Mark Twain and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and others, they went to see his talks. He was a big name. All
Wow.
these guys are free thinkers. Um,
Yeah.
so he says, we have already compared the benefits of theology and science. When the theologian governed the world, it was covered with huts and hovels for the many, palaces and cathedrals for the few. To nearly all the children of men, reading and writing were unknown arts. The poor were clad in rags and skins, they devoured crust and gnawed bones. The day of science dawned, and the luxuries of a century ago are the necessities of today. Men in the middle ranks of life have more of the conveniences and elegancies than the princes and kings of the theological times. But above and over all this is the development of mind. There is more of value in the brain of an average man today, of a master mechanic, of a chemist, of a naturalist, of an inventor, than there was in the brain of the world 400 years ago. These blessings did not fall from the skies. These benefits did not drop from the outstretched hands of priests. They were not found in cathedrals or behind altars. Neither were they searched for with holy candles. They were not discovered by the closed eyes of prayer, nor did they come in an answer to superstitious supplication. They are the children of freedom, the gifts of reason, observation, and experience. And for them all, man is indebted to man.
Yes, and that last quote really, sums up kind of why I'm so upset that religion has not gotten out of the way of science. It still hasn't completely in many places in the world, but you think of all the horrific pictures you've seen of children dying or children in iron lungs. If religion would have been able to been shoved out of the way earlier, those pictures may not even have had a need to exist. It's just yet another reason of just why this religion, literally is a poison. It is.
Right. And this is from the ending of the Cosmos series. It's Neil deGrasse Tyson. Um, the first new one in 2014. Only a few centuries ago, on our pale blue dot, a second of cosmic time, we knew nothing of where or when we were, oblivious to the rest of the cosmos. We inhabited a kind of prison, a tiny universe. How did we escape from the prison? It was the work of generations of searchers who took 5 simple rules to heart. Number one, question authority. No idea is true just because someone says so, including me. Number two, think for yourself. Question yourself. Don't believe anything just because you want to or somebody else wants you to. Believing doesn't make it so. Number three, test ideas by the evidence gained from observation and experience. If a favorite idea fails a well-designed test, it's wrong. Get over it. Number four, follow the evidence wherever it leads. If you have no evidence, reserve judgment. Number five, perhaps the most important rule of all, remember you could be wrong. Even the best scientists have been wrong about something. They're human. Um, Science has been misused like every other tool at our disposal, though it nor its values have ever given motive to that abuse. And that's why we can't afford to have it in the hands of a powerful few. The more science belongs to all of us, the less likely it is to be misused. These values of science undermine the appeals of fanaticism and ignorance. Learning the age of the earth, the distance to the stars, how life evolves matters depending on what kind of universe you want to live in. Some like it small, but I like it big. And when I take this into my heart and my mind, I'm lifted by it. When I have that feeling, I want to know that it's real, that it's not just something happening inside my head, because it matters what's true. And our imagination is nothing compared with nature's awesome reality. I want to know what's in those dark places and what happened before the Big Bang. I want to know what lies beyond the cosmic horizon and how life began. Are there other places in the cosmos where matter and energy have become alive and aware? I want to know my ancestors, all of them. I want to be a steady link in the chain of generations. I want to protect my children and all the children of the ages to come. We embody the local eyes and ears, thoughts and feelings of the cosmos. We have begun to learn the story of our origins, star stuff, contemplating the evolution of matter, tracing a long path that leads to consciousness. We and the other living things on this planet carry a legacy of cosmic evolution spanning billions of years. If we take that knowledge to heart, if we come to know and love nature as it really is, then we will surely be remembered by our descendants as good, strong links in the chain of life. And our children will continue the sacred searching, seeing for us as we have seen for those that have come before, discovering wonders yet undreamt of, and the cosmos. And that is a favorite quote of mine, about science. I think those 5 rules, if people could just adopt those more in general, not just,
And just
science.
think of how that opens your mind. If you believe that there is an authority that can't be reasoned with, and whatever it says is correct for all time, how can there be any innovation? I mean, how can there be anything new that comes about if it's all set literally in stone tablets? And that's why shows like Cosmos are so important. So important.
I'm reminding of one quote by Roger G. Ingersoll. That he said, the Protestants Pope is a book, and at least the popes can at least do some progress and change some things, like they did, with the Vatican II Council in the 60s. They became a little more liberal, but the book, is still going to be as ignorant as it always was, right?
Yeah, and I mean, if you notice,
Another thing about the absence of evidence. Go ahead.
no, I was going to say, if you notice what they normally get credit for stopping or helping with is a problem they created in the first place, and it's really just kind of demented to keep giving them credit.
Yeah. On the absence of evidence does not equal evidence of absence. It actually does when it's just not conclusive evidence. So absence of evidence
Yeah.
is evidence of absence, but it's not conclusive evidence. But definitely where there's an absence of evidence, would you definitely expect to see evidence? It's definitely absence of evidence, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, all right.
Do you want me to read any of these if your like the voice is still hurting or whatever?
Yeah, if you want to.
Yeah. I mean, you just tell me, if you want me to read the whole page or not. Oh, you can edit this little talk out, right?
It doesn't matter, man. I mean,
Okay.
this is just this is not live. It'll be uploaded, but I mean,
Okay.
it doesn't matter. Uh, yeah, this is kind of like blocked out a little bit by my logo.
Oh, it
Can you
is.
hold on?
I can't see behind the logo. No, I'm just saying, just to give you a rest of having to do all the reading.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to read that first one, if you can see behind the logo, I can read beneath it.
That's cool. So this is math, reductionism, DNA. Some quotes pertaining to them. So mathematics is nothing more than a language distinguished by its component simplicity and lack of ambiguity. A language humans created for, I think, identifying repeating patterns that we know can manifest out of the arrangements of matter and energy in space-time. All of mathematics can be reduced, in fact, to one simple branch called geometry, the language we invented for precisely describing pattern and shape. Logic and mathematics are human creations, just like English or German. And just like German, logic and mathematics describe both real and potentially real things, repeatable patterns of matter, energy, and space-time. What we call perception is essentially the ability to locate and distinguish patterns in the data of sensation, and recognition is the ability to identify similarities among those patterns, past and present. More and more, it appears that all sociology can be reduced to psychology. All of psychology can be reduced to biology. All of biology can be reduced to chemistry, and all of chemistry can be reduced to physics, which is the study of matter and energy in space-time. Therefore, everything is matter, energy, and space-time. Society can be reduced to humans. Humans can be reduced to cells. Cells can be reduced to chemical systems, which can be reduced in turn to subatomic particles. That does not make us merely matter in motion. There's obviously a difference between us now and us hacked into a stew. Both contain all the same matter, but not the same pattern of arrangement, a defining element. Physical laws are the inevitable end result of what a universe is. What we call physical laws are not really laws, but just precise descriptions of behaviors and relationships consistently observed in nature. And this is a kind of a quote, I think, eloquently breaking down reductionism and how you can reduce is everything is matter, energy, or the universe, or nature, however you want to put it.
Yeah, and that's really well said too about the stew part, because if you think about us and chimpanzees, it's like 90-something% the same, but it doesn't mean that you could cut out 8% of my body and the rest is chimpanzee. There's a big difference in how it's put together, how it's sort of, if you think of it like computer coding, that's the genetic code.
Right.
Depending on which order you type the zeros and ones in, you're going to get something very different to happen to that computer. So,
right. If you want to read the next one, the part now, and it's about DNA.
okay. Atoms of which we are made are as apparently lifeless as those compromising rocks. It is highly improbable that an accidentally assembled code would employ any more than a handful of basic units in its fundamental structure. Lo and behold, we observe this to be the case. A God almost certainly would use an infallible spiritual essence to accomplish the same ends, exactly as all Christians thought for nearly 2,000 years. Instead, we have fallible and malfunctioning DNA that mutates regularly in life, causing cancer, and reproduction, causing death, disability, or unplanned novelty. The only way a Christian can explain or novelty, sorry, wow. The only way a Christian can explain the actual facts is by pulling out of thin air some reason why God would design life in exactly the way required by the theory that life wasn't designed by a God, a way that was demonstrably inferior to what he could have done. A loving God also would not create an animal kingdom that depended on 72 wonton.
Sorry, that's from my book, and it copied the page
Okay,
number. Sorry.
That depended on wonton rape.
Ignore the 72.
Yeah, on wanton rape and murder to persist and thrive, nor would animals have to produce hundreds of offspring because all of them will die, most of them horribly. And that's from Richard Carrier's Why I'm Not a Christian. And DNA is also not a method of communication and not interpreted by anything, thus not a language in that sense. The assertion that even a programming definition of language is always a product of a mind is unsubstantiated. This is an argument from ignorance, which natural selection has completely demolished. DNA is a set of rules and instructions that follow the physical laws of nature. The author of these instructions is natural selection. Even if the theistic argument of DNA was valid, like the cosmological argument, it would only prove an originator of some kind, not a god or the god of a specific religion. After all this, what are the odds that a god who couldn't make an iron chariot and was outsmarted by a snake could manage complex molecular engineering? Richard Carrier, man, he's so brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, the scientists who discovered the double helix of DNA and decoded the human genome were atheists. We can't speak to the probability of there being a God or that things would evolve or occur naturally, as we have no points of comparison. However, the universe is very old and very large, which would be required and expected if naturally occurring.
Thank you for giving me a break, Scott.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Breaking down.
Yeah, man, just anytime if you want to go back and forth, man, we can.
That's cool. Yeah,
thinking, like, wow, he's reading a lot.
Yeah. The scientists who discovered the double helix of DNA, Francis Crick and James Watson, and also Rosalind Franklin, who was a woman who who died early and was unfortunately kind of crowded out of getting her
Mhm.
Nobel Prize for it. And the decoder of the human genome was Craig Venter. All these people were atheists. Just point that out.
Yeah, Francis Collins helped map it, and I know he's a Christian, but yeah, I think as far
Did
as I
he?
know, yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
he actually is, because he has a book. I'm pretty sure I remember it, where he talks about his reason for believing in God is
Hmm.
he was hiking and he was in the mountains, and there was a waterfall that was
Oh.
frozen into
Oh my
freeze.
God! Sam Harris
And it made me
destroys
think of
him
the
in the
Trinity.
moral
Yeah,
landscape.
exactly.
Yeah.
No, it's
Yeah, I
all
know.
good.
I know.
It's a lot of slides, man. A lot of.
Yeah.
You're good.
Okay, so reason clearly evolved and survived alongside our social instincts because it helped us to. For a mobile thinking species like us, if our beliefs didn't correspond well enough to reality, we wouldn't have survived. The fact that the findings of science on very large, small, and vast scales escape our intuitive grasp is what we would expect if reason had evolutionary origins honed to our environments. Even without any ultimate or divine foundation, reason works, and this is demonstrated by all we've been able to do and build. This is the only foundation or justification it needs. It may be true that there is bad reasoning or that one could conceivably reason their way to anything, but it is reason that corrects past errors in reasoning. One also can't argue against reason or for or against anything without using reason. And as
Yes.
the simple notion of 2 plus 2 equals 4 shows, solid reasoning is deterministic, corresponding to the patterns by which our universe operates. When people decide to openly and fairly attempt to get their biases out of the way and rely on strong standards of evidence and improve the faculty of reason, like logical coherence, avoiding logical fallacies, etc., they're pushed in certain directions, and we can come together and reason our way to better and sounder conclusions, and have.
Hmm.
So,
That's
and
a hard thing to happen sometimes in conversation, though. It's tough. It takes a
I
while.
included this here because there's the argument that if reason is a product of, like, blind deterministic evolution, and I mean we didn't evolve to know this, it can only come from, if we want to rely on reason, it can only come from a god, basically, is the argument. It's like,
Oh,
no, that's not true. Evolution, it helped us survive, and it has an evolutionary survival advantage. So if we and we're not perfectly rational, obviously. I
oh
mean, we
yeah.
have all kinds of things we have to get over, and we have to think about, and we have to build instruments to extend our reach, our knowledge, our everything. And so it's not, it's not. But the fact that
It's not at
that's
all.
further
Yeah.
proof that reason is a product of evolution. Yeah, it's
What's
further
wild about that?
evidence that reason is a product of evolution that was just,
Yeah,
and
but like
it's
what's
honed to our
crazy?
environment. That's why some of the findings of science are like, wow, that's weird, and it makes no intuitive sense
Hmm. And
because
like what's
we
crazy
evolved
about
in Middle Earth on middle scales. And
but like what's crazy about
go
that
ahead.
attempt at an argument for reason, if that is the case, what was the need of the tree of knowledge? And why would he test Adam and Eve, who are freshly made human beings, against, evidently the ultimate hustler? I mean, I think God is the ultimate hustler if he is real, not Satan.
Yeah, yeah, really. I mean, yeah,
Because think about it, Adam and Eve, us and how we came to the positions we're at took decades of learning and reading and talking. Adam and Eve were freshly made and skipped all that. They were adult humans, allegedly, or at least teenagers or something. And
yeah.
so they had no prior experience, no prior reason to rely on. And that's why they failed their reasonable God's test. It's
I have
just
a I have a
nonsense.
note all the problems with the Adam and Eve story that we're going to get to here in a while.
Ooh,
So
okay,
yeah,
good.
you can read this one. This is actually my writing from my blog, but you can read it if you
Okay.
like.
Morality foundations. The foundations of morality are summed up in two simple sentences. I feel bad when I treat another poorly. I risk being treated poorly if I treat another poorly. The first sentence speaks to our innate human empathy. The second sentence speaks to the fact that we are an interconnected, interdependent social species that has to live together. These are simply unavoidable, inevitable facts about us and any other social creatures that may exist like us. Certainly, there will always be difficult situations that there are no easy answers to. However, in terms of foundations, this is about as secure as it gets. The mistaken belief that morality is founded on obedience to authority or emanating from the authority, human or divine, entails being a minion. It enshrines might makes right, love it, and requires no thought, no feeling, no understanding or growth. It is really an abdication of morality, and the pernicious poverty of this kind of thinking is observable through time. The age old religious thinking that everything as it was or as it is was ordained by God was a great obstacle that the Enlightenment thinkers who established modern secular democracy had to overcome. It's at the core of most of our natures to desire survival and flourishing, and any prescription for those goals that does not consider the bedrock facts of empathy and interdependence will be defective.
I have nothing to add to my own words.
No, I mean, that's very well said. And I mean, the might makes right thing is so important. It's amazing how so many believers do not see it that way. They use like an analogy like, well, you have been born as a sinner and God's throwing you the life preserver to come to his boat, or, some absurd analogy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why put us in the water to drown in the first place? Why not start us off a little better? This makes no sense.
And the point about the Enlightenment, about Jonathan Israel makes this point that the foundations of modernity, the good parts, the democracy, secularism, human rights, separation of church and state, all of this stuff derives from the radical Enlightenment, from Spinoza to Diderot to D'Holbach to Condorcet to the people who founded the French Revolution before it went crazy. That's been enshrined in the 1948 Declaration of Human Rights after World War II. All of this stuff. It was spawned from people that had to be free thinkers, that had to not be religious, because the religious, most of them thought that things were ordained by God, women in their place,
the divine right of
slavery's in the Bible,
ideas,
stuff like that. It had to be fought against. You had to fight the very foundations of society that was founded on the Bible and on Christianity, on religion. It had to be fought against. And it had to also rediscover some of the same arguments that people in the classical world that were free thinkers, that had no dogma, the priests in ancient Greece, they didn't talk about ethics and stuff so much. They weren't as powerful. So these free thinkers, these philosophers and proto-scientists back in ancient Greece that were free thinking, they had to be rediscovered too. Because the only thing the Christians preserved of them was like some of Plato, when he talked about the immortal soul and things like that.
A lot of them were preserved in Baghdad for
Keep
a
reading,
while.
man.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
So
theists claim their morality is objective, despite its source being a subject with its subjective opinions, however powerful. See the urethro. How do you pronounce that?
Dilemma.
Sorry. A dilemma
for a dilemma.
Okay, for complete dismantling of divine command morality. In short, it asks, does God command something because it's moral, or is something moral because God commands it? If God commands things because they're moral, or to say God is good, is to admit that morality and goodness exist separately from and doesn't require God. If goodness/morality are whatever God commands, those terms are rendered meaningless and arbitrary, and what we would find evil becomes good if God commands it, as happens frequently in Scripture. And it also depends on which God you're choosing, because someone else is going to think yours is wrong. And
goodness or morality existing independently, or a standard of goodness and morality existing independently.
Mm-hmm. So put another way, if God has good reasons for his moral commands, those reasons can be appealed to without the middleman. If he, she, it doesn't, his morality is unreasonable and undesirable, and only fear or prudence, hardly very moral, would compel you to follow them. Saying God's nature, or the nature of an undefinable, shifting, unproven, incomprehensible being is good, leads to a restating of the question. Is the goodness a fundamental component of God, or is his nature good because goodness exists independent of God and he aligns his nature with goodness? If the former, good is just an arbitrary designation referring to God's nature, and there is no yardstick to measure what goodness is or prove God's commands are moral. That's a very, very well put argument there, because if what God does is good, then the people he drowned during the flood, that is okay. You know,
Yeah.
pregnant women, that's a double homicide, or is that an abortion or a miscarriage? Or, I mean, what is that? It's just crazy. And
Ironically, this argument, the Euthyphro dilemma, comes from a dialogue from Plato. It's actually he's recounting Socrates is saying it, and it's actually originally about piety, but it makes the same points. And Plato
okay,
is the one that wrote it, and so maybe we don't know how accurate it is, but this is an argument from Socrates as relayed by Plato.
okay. And so, further, given the oh God, I can't pronounce.
Profligate,
Okay,
profligate.
profligate misery of our world and the multiplicity, ineffectiveness, and terror of religion, the existence of an evil God appears at least as likely as a benevolent one. The idea of hell alone is responsible for oceans of blood and is an ultimate barrier to unity, reason, peace, tolerance, and progress. Simply ask yourself, if human kindness, reason, potential, well being were better in the ages when this thinking reigned absolutely. Reflect on how frameworks such as Christianity have nothing to do with moral accountability, as serial killers can come to Jesus and be in heaven, while compassionate people who are simply, oftentimes involuntarily, unconvinced of an unsupported proposition are damned.
It's
Observe the
always
feet.
involuntary. I don't think you choose your beliefs. Yeah.
Observe the feeble and dangerous nature when one ties morality to religion and then loses that religion. While we will always be social animals among social animals that have to live together. And that's so important because, like you said earlier, that the best places to live right now, the safest, are the least religious. And I mean,
Yeah.
like people always use this example, and it's not like we're trying to harp on Islam, but it's just a
Mhm.
very powerful faith with billions of followers. And look at the places where that is dominant. All of the bad stuff we've talked about, it's literally all there because they missed that enlightenment. It hasn't had a reformation. That's terrifying.
You can keep reading, man. I'm gonna come back strong when I get my voice back.
All right. Our innate empathy forces us to consider morality in other people. It's a foundation that makes morality inescapable. Empathy by itself probably is not enough and doesn't really tell us what we should do in detail. The other half of those foundations I posited is the fact that we're an interconnected, interdependent social species, and there are often social consequences for bad behavior. We need and rely on others for almost everything. Again, this is inescapable. What enables us to realize these things and build off those foundations in greater detail is reason, which is crucial and also inescapable. As I said in the closing, we all, by our very nature, at our core, desire survival and flourishing. And any prescription for those goals that does not consider the bedrock facts of empathy and interdependence will be problematic. That these things are so core and foundational to our species makes them beyond just subjective whim, and you may say they are in a sense objective, though they are not a law of the universe or something. The universe doesn't care about us. These facts and foundations are also, of course, more immediate, tangible, practical, demonstrable than any deity or deity-based morality, which is usually a great way to dismiss your fellow human beings. Oh, that's so true. And Dostoevsky famously observed that if God does not exist, everything is permitted. But that's backwards. Everything is permitted if a God commands it. For the person who believes God is on their side, everything is justifiable. Well said.
Yeah, and I have a couple notes to add here to that. This is just kind of an interesting quote from Star Trek Voyager.
All right.
Um,
Hey.
it's a character Kess is talking. She says, "Empathy and kindness are basic to all forms of life, more fundamental and primary than cruelty or evil. The very organs and cells of the body cooperate with each other, otherwise they wouldn't function. Families, societies, cultures wouldn't have evolved without compassion and tolerance. They wouldn't have fallen apart. They would have fallen apart without it. Technology would never have been developed without cooperation and understanding between countless individuals." I think there's a lot of truth to that, but I think that because yeah, things would have completely fallen apart if there wasn't some of
Mhm.
that, and there is more of things cooperating, even on the biological level, than
Oh, yeah.
uh,
Well, like, think
so
about, the universe that character is in making this statement. If these
Yeah.
other species didn't have that empathy and work together, they wouldn't be in the Federation of Planets, or they wouldn't be considered for it. So yeah, I mean, it's very well said.
Yeah. Though Hans Rowling, he has a book called Factfulness. Why things are way better than we think they are, something like that. I forget the subtitle exactly. He's a big TED Talk guy. He's given all kinds of talks about this. He makes
Okay.
some of the points Steven Pinker does about all the progress we made.
Yeah.
He boils it down to the world used to be mostly barbaric, and now it's mostly not barbaric. So there is that point that we have had this kind of overall progress amidst all the problems, and sometimes backsliding. That take that into the picture of this quote from Kes from Star Trek Voyager 2, at least on the societal level, that things have gotten better. They used to be a lot more barbaric.
Mm-hmm.
But there has to always been some good and cooperation too, or it would have completely fallen apart. That point is valid. Yeah. One more note on this one. So somebody asked me at some point, is there a purely logical case for compassion and for helping the least fortunate? And so I said, a world where we do not help the unfortunate goes against our evolved psychology as social animals. Further, if one group is treated poorly, your group could be next. Further, great benefit society, and by extension, you can be cultivated by cultivating talent that otherwise wouldn't be among the unfortunate. That kind of world would be less stable and desirable. Oppressed groups also eventually, though it can't take a long time, cause chaos and fight back. We are
Mm-hmm.
empathetic social creatures who are entirely interconnected and interdependent, sharing a common home, interest, and humanity, all of which is separate from and devoid of, more basic than, and requires no unsupported dogma or claims about the world. It's a perspective that is true regardless of the situation or facts of the greater, wider universe beyond our pale blue dot. A rational, objective assessment of things, including recognizing that some places and ideas are more healthy and successful than others, and some individuals possess abilities others do not, must take into account these unifying facts. Our only protection is from other humans who we can trust. The same traits that will create trust personally can be applied to a healthy, reliable, functioning culture and society and community of societies generally. A destructive, unworthy, duplicitous, uncaring society or person is not beneficial, or leaves much to be desired, even if the person or society is too inebriated by power to recognize it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sums it
So,
up. But
and
it's
I
so
thought I
true.
did a pretty good job with this blog about morality, because like there were. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying that it took me a long time to develop what I could be, yes, in some way confident about, some blog addressing the morality. Um, because it can be tricky, and you have to really think things through,
Oh
and
yeah.
ask yourself, how valid is this? How supported by evidence is? Yeah. So go
Well,
ahead with
well
what you were saying.
I was going to say it's kind of like we've hinted at some in some of these quotes and just our talks we've talked about before. There's the good kind of greedy, where if you care about your neighbor and want them, to be well taken care of, they're much less
Yeah.
likely to steal from you or hurt you due to lack of a resource. I mean, the reason there's so many people stealing stuff from Walmart, it's not just, but like there's some assholes who just go steal just to steal, but most of them are stealing because they have no choice to feed their children or to get things they need. And so when you have a system that just punishes that and doesn't help prevent that, it's not a good way to operate. And so that's, the human flourishing that we both want. I mean, you have to apply reason to this. Religion is no help here. I mean, depending on the religion, it could say cut their hand off or just kill them,
Mm,
for stealing. So
yeah.
it's no help at all.
So this next one is meaning. So life is full of meaning. Eternal servitude is meaningless. That's the way I always look at heaven, right?
Yes. Oh, I
What's the
agree.
purpose and meaning of worshiping somebody forever? Not only that, the person that has my loved ones in hell forever. And how am I an automaton in heaven? Like,
I
what's the
think you would
deal
have,
there? How could I be
because you just
happy?
made a very good point. I mean, like, what if, like, say, like, I find someone to marry and she's a Christian and I'm obviously the atheist that I am. Is she going to have fun turning up with God while I'm burning forever? I mean, if
Yeah.
you probably never loved me that much, I guess. I
Yeah.
don't know.
The universe has no apparent meaning that doesn't keep entities from within the universe from having purposes and meanings. Eternal worship, especially for a being who created an eternal hell for our loved ones and demands it, is hardly something meaningful or to be hoped for from my perspective. And something that demands worship probably isn't worth worshiping. I don't think
Yeah,
anything's worth worshiping. I don't worship anything. But if there were something, it probably wouldn't be demanding that you worship, right? Right?
exactly. It would
I
make
mean,
you cringe. Like, imagine you're a woman on a dating site and you're just cringing at all these DMs and demands men send to women, the crudeness and the rudeness and just dumb crap.
yeah.
That's God telling you what to do. It's that cringy. Yeah.
Love, sex, adventure, friendship, human progress, the exploration of the universe are full and rich and near endless purposes that have value because we value them, and I don't think should be sacrificed to the phantoms of our ancestors. As a quote from my book, A Justified Faith: if you're looking for human compassion, human purpose, human creativity, human connection, human advancement, how about looking in the one place we know it exists and emanates from, humanity?
Yeah, it's beautiful, man. It's
Um,
so true. Because I
as a
mean,
quote,
it's like
go ahead.
Sagan said, there's no evidence that anyone is coming to help us. It is up to us.
Yeah. Quote from the bottom by Sam Harris: the universe is shot through with mystery. The very fact of its being and of our own is a mystery absolute, and the only miracle worthy of the name. No myth needs to be embraced for us to commune with the profundity of our circumstance. No personal God needs to be worshipped for us to live in awe at the beauty and immensity of creation. Uh, and I'm sure it doesn't mean creation as it was created by an agent.
Yeah,
So,
no.
because he's an atheist. No tribal fictions need to be rehearsed for us to realize one fine day that we do in fact love our neighbors, that our happiness is inextricably linked to our own, and that our interdependence demands that people everywhere be given the opportunity to flourish. The days of our religious identities are clearly numbered. Whether the days of civilization itself are numbered would seem to depend rather too much on how soon we realize this.
Oh, that's so true. That last little part, like, wow. Yeah, it's very true.
You want to read this one?
Yeah. On nihilism. Defenders of religion have long claimed that in the absence of divine edicts, people are sentenced to lives of relativism and nihilism. We can now appreciate why this line of argument is mistaken,
Nihilism. Yeah.
or nihilism, sorry, discovering earthly ways in which human beings can flourish, including stratagems to overcome the tragedy of the inherent appeal of aggression, should be purpose enough for anyone. If a goal that is nobler than joining a celestial
It is a goal. Sorry.
yeah, melting into a cosmic spirit or being reincarnated into a higher life form because the goal can be justified to any fellow thinker rather than being inculcated to arbitrary factions by charisma, tradition, or force. And the data we have seen show that it is a goal on which progress can be made, progress that is halting and incomplete, but unmistakable nonetheless. Yeah. Otherworldly religion is not the cure for nihilism, but a symptom of it. We realize ourselves individually and collectively not by bemoaning our depravity and abasing ourselves before inscrutable deities, but through the improvement of the understanding that brings with it both pleasure and virtue. The only choice we really have is to be conscious or to persist in destructive illusions. It remains as fashionable today as it has been to lament the nihilism that supposedly grips us when we shed the false certainty of ignorance, and to bemoan the doom that will surely befall us if we depart from the simple faith of our fathers. But the fact remains the common power of humanity, the capability for cooperative action that is really just another word for our moral well being, was never greater than after we lost our religion. Liberalism has produced the most powerful and prosperous states that the world has ever known because it is far more robust than any collection of fictions or fickle emotions could ever be. Matthew Stewart. And one might also, one might also conjecture that if one exists for eternity, that might make life rather nihilistic. Or if the only purpose of existence is to be the eternally worshiping slave and plaything of a might makes right, capricious supreme dictator, or even a benevolent deity, then that's worse than a nihilism and rather meaningless. And yeah, that is so true because what could be more meaningless than being forced to do what an all-powerful being wants. I mean,
Right.
really.
Imagine if somebody, in the world, they set out your career and your life for you, and how are you going
Yeah.
to be?
Because
Yeah,
look at how human beings react to just an arranged marriage. I mean, Ayan
yeah.
Hersey Lee risked her life to escape that. So why would we think that all human beings are going to be just perfectly happy falling in line? It's like that famous speech Hitchens
And
gave
God,
on.
God, who supposedly created us, knew all this about our nature. You know?
Yeah, and we're made after in His image, so maybe He doesn't like being bullied and told what to do either. I
Oh,
mean,
he definitely
evidently.
doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, evidently he'll burn you for it. At least that's what I keep hearing. But it's like Hitchens said in Canada about this law that was going to try and limit speech and ban books and stuff. He said, "Who among you that you know or love would you choose to be your personal censor and tell you what you could or could not read?" And then
Right,
scale that up from there to everything about this existence and see, try to see and think about just how happy you really would be. I don't think you would be that happy under that kind of rule at all.
right. Um,
Um, you want me to read this one
I'll
too?
read this one. Yeah, this is from also from a blog of mine.
Okay.
Um, all people are subjected to misfortune and doom based on the indifferent laws of physics that move our universe. Falling trees don't refrain from killing who walks under them because of whom they may pray to. Hurricanes and plagues slaughter people no matter their beliefs, and often false causes and information provided by religion, e.g., demons, witches, heretics, God's wrath, have exacerbated the death and bloodshed through history. For millennia, despite the much greater frequency of prayers and rituals, people lived short lives of misery. This didn't
Hmm.
improve until modern science accurately identified reality and was thus able to alter it. Ironically, today it's the people in the most religious societies who haven't fully reaped these advances and who tend to live the shortest, most impoverished, sickest, and most violent lives. How weak, how irrational a position that has to parade endless excuses in a hide and seek God that operates in a way where the universe looks like it would if he did not exist. God works mysteriously when something bad happens, but his behavior is seen as quite intelligible when it's something good. And this is another quote from Ingersoll. The hand of earth is stretched uselessly towards heaven. From the clouds there comes no help. In vain the shipwrecked cry to God. In vain the imprisoned ask for liberty and light. The world moves on, and the heavens are deaf, dumb, and blind. The frost freezes, the fire burns, slander smites, wrong triumphs, the good suffer, and prayer dies upon the lips of faith.
Wow. Yeah, that even Frederick Douglass, who stayed a Christian, somehow after what he went through, said that I think for almost 20 years I prayed and it was never answered until I prayed with my feet. I mean,
Right.
that's up, man.
Yep. You can read that one.
Okay. Our indifferent universe continued. Believers for the foreseeable future will likely keep attending massive sermons, immense pandemics, and dying like everyone else. Another family will survive another plane crash and thank God, knowing full well countless other families perish despite their faith. Those who have risked their lives to fight injustice will again pass prematurely, while callous, misinformation spewing narcissists remain in power. Followers of these men will likely keep thinking they were installed by God, even as one crisis after another besieges them. All of these people will likely remain on bended knee, praying and believing in providence despite all evidence to the contrary. Sounds like our neighbors. Anyone can invent stories or excuses for why the world doesn't match up with the asserted governance of it by a benevolent being, with a supposed protector who doesn't seem to protect anyone or do anything. Comfort may be drawn from these stories, but it's worth continually interrogating this religious mindset and asking how rational and useful for actually bettering the world it is. Science has shown that the universe operates by impersonal patterns or laws and is completely indifferent to us, we being infinitely small in it. That all progress has come from actual human action, the acquisition and application of knowledge. It is science that offers us the clearest, best, and as far as can be seen, the only path to approaching immortality. It's demonstrably the case that for all of history, until the coming of modern science, God's prayers, rituals, and the religious mindset did not alter the exponentially lower quality and length of human life, nor did prayer ever do much to silence when it wasn't busy contributing to the eternal echo of the screams and cries of the innocent. Man,
Yeah,
think of
and this
how
is
many people have died in this world just for the hour and 40 minutes we've been talking so far.
mhm,
Certainly, almost all of them had somebody praying for them.
yeah. Another example that I used at the end of this blog is the Lisbon earthquake in 1755, I think, that
Yeah.
Voltaire wrote a poem about that kind of shook Europe in multiple ways. So it was on All Saints' Day, and there were people in their churches, and they were like praying and stuff. And the earthquake it toppled like all the churches, and people died while they were praying. It left brothels intact. Brothels were cool, they left standing.
Like in New
But the
Orleans,
people,
the red light district didn't get flooded, but everywhere else did. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, the candles. I don't see what's wrong with it anyway. Why it's just something supposed to be immoral, but that's at least as
No.
long as it's like everything consensual. But anyway, um, they let their candles out, so fires spread because of it too, for All Saints Day. And then I think a tsunami came and like wiped
Yes.
more people away. So yeah,
The
and
same
Voltaire
day.
remained a deist somehow, but it shook him
Yeah.
too. Uh, all right.
But I mean, back then, without science being as advanced as it was, I can see how deism still had a lot more sway. I mean, it makes sense in that light, I guess.
Yeah. You want to read this one?
Mm-hmm. In different universes, continued free will. A loving God, like a loving person supposedly made in his image, will not sit by while others suffer. They will not be an absentee parent that is never present in any verifiable way. Similar to the once apparent ubiquity of miracles, God showing himself and interfering, supposedly violating our free will, didn't seem to be a problem in times past. We had technologies like smartphones everywhere to capture and verify it. Free will is a tricky subject, whether the universe is determined or random. However, many levels of it have been disproved by science. Nevertheless, God's presence would not eliminate free will if it did exist. People would still have the choice to follow him or not, secure in the knowledge that a God, and a particular God in its clear and particular nature and or requirements exists, instead of the vague and conflicting and weak evidence we now have. Man, that's so good. And have you asked, is there free will in heaven? If there is, then why can't this world have had free will and be like heaven? Why can't this world have been made heaven in the first place? What does free will have to do with cancer and hurricanes or the innumerable lethal threats inherent in the design of things, such as parasites and the single hole we use for eating, drinking, and speaking? Though virtue and integrity are beneficial in a myriad of ways, and their alternatives equally uh,
Deleterious.
deleterious, why isn't this world so designed that integrity and virtue are always rewarded and innocence protected? The fact is, it is people who have overcome their metaphorical demons, gone with the cooperation side of their evolutionary instincts over the tribalistic, and bettered the world with medicine, law, charity, science, art, and civilization, with no God detectable anywhere in the story. If he ever was there, it can be said that people have been improving his botched work. It's very true. And the thing, too, something I like to add about the free will and the heaven one, the third set here, is
Mhm.
what is the purpose of testing us here anyway? I mean, like that just seems really cruel, especially when it's not a fair test at all.
Right. This is the one I have some notes for on everything wrong with the Garden of Eden story. So if you want to read this, I'm going to look for those notes.
Okay.
Okay.
This is in different universe continued into the fall. The fall of humanity, oh, documented in the Adam and Eve story, might be brought in next, but this story was plagiarized from the older Sumerian culture, is completely disproved by science, and has numerous logical and moral problems. This story glorifies ignorance when knowledge is and has been the lifeblood of progress. It blames it all on a woman which has justified misogyny for millennia. It's all-knowing God also put that tree in the garden knowing what they would do. He's a God of games and traps. He also punishes them for a wrong when they had no conception of right and wrong, damning generations with original sin for the crimes of ancestors, the crime of being how God made them and how he knew they'd be, goes against centuries of Western law and conceptions of fairness. When we search holy books for other, better excuses for the immense suffering in the world, the paucity is deafening. In the book God's Problems, New Testament scholar Bart Ehrman surveys the conflicting biblical explanations with range from suffering and punishment to suffering as a test to suffering as simply the nature of things, and God will make it all right in the end. Aside from the contradictions, what lesson is there for the children killed by cancer? What growth via suffering is there for them or their devastated parents? Are parents that abuse or neglect their children, but then reward them worthy of praise? We do learn by a healthy dose of suffering, but a God could have made a universe where that's all we deal with, or where no suffering was necessary at all. Or he could have scaled the suffering down. Like, why does the worst thing have to be dying? Couldn't it be like a broken leg? I mean,
Yeah,
you would
and
still.
like I said, it makes he could make it where the only suffering is what helps us grow, that
Mhm,
kind of suffering, which is what I said. But obviously, that you don't even need if a God can make any kind of universe he wanted, it doesn't
mhm.
have to be that via suffering we grow or learn. Um, and obviously,
Yes.
there's an immense suffering that it's completely pointless, and that's the whole point of that.
And the thing is, too, he would know exactly the amount of suffering we would need. It goes back to them saying, God doesn't give you any more than you can handle. Well, I would ask you to look around with a critical lens and see if you really can believe that after visiting a children's hospital. I don't think you
Right.
can survive with that thought. And finally, holy books go on to tell us such things as belief protects against poison, Mark's chapter 16, verse 18. Many of these claims are as demonstrably false as the claims that belief in God is the prime road to virtue and success when prisons are full of believers, and many of our most successful people and countries don't believe, or the claim that non-belief leads to nihilism when supernatural religion is so often a symptom of a nihilism rather than a cure for it, reigning most fiercely in times of darkness. Think also of the absurdity of the endless wars over inherited faith, where both sides could believe they had God on their side, making them capable of anything. Oh, that's so true. And God, after having never spoken clearly or at all, and causing this situation, has never spoken up to declare one right or stop the fighting. Yeah, for a God that evidently takes sides, he sure
Hmm.
is real quiet when he needs to speak up. And, we've talked about it before of weather being a punishment from God. And that day in the 1700s, you talked about, some religious leaders did say that was a punishment. Now, if that's the
Some of
case,
them still do.
hmm now, if that's the case, what are all those storms on Jupiter about? Who is
Right.
sinning on Jupiter?
And why
Or is
is the
that,
Bible Belt in Tornado Alley?
yeah, exactly. Does he practice killing things on Jupiter? I mean, it just makes no sense.
Yeah, it makes
Or
no
like,
sense. All these people praying when a tornado or something comes.
yeah,
So the very being who apparently created the tornado and sent it in the first place, right?
and if he
Um,
spares you and not your neighbor, and you call yourself blessed, then was your neighbor cursed? I mean, it's just, how do you reason this out?
and this is the whole point of the indifferent universe. The
Hmm.
the things we suffer are indiscriminate. There is no
Oh,
group of people based on religion, innocence, age, anything that are protected. It's the impersonal laws of physics. That's what whole thing is about.
oh
Um,
yeah.
Abraham Lincoln, who wrote a book against the Bible when he was younger, and a lot of his lawyer friends called him an out and out atheist. He talked about God. Maybe he believed in a God when he was a president, but he noted, that in the Civil War, both sides were praying for God to, are saying
Same.
God was on the side. They can't both be right.
Exactly.
But
And
the South had the theological better argument, the Bible that supports slavery. But
yeah,
um, onto
it's
the Garden of Eden. So issues with
yeah.
the Garden of Eden story that I jotted down while reading The Rise and Fall of Adam and Eve by Stephen Greenblatt. So the Garden of Eden, what kind of God would forbid his creatures to know the difference between good and evil? How would it have been possible for those creatures to obey without such knowledge? Imagine violently punishing an uncomprehending, disobedient 5-year-old. What could the threat of death mean to those who had never experienced it and could not know what it was? Did the
Yeah.
all-knowing maker not know what his creatures would do, and how could he have regrets? Is he not the one ultimately responsible, like a ruler who gives a knife to a maniac in a crowd, knowing mass murder will ensue? Don't good
Mhm.
parents intervene when their children are in danger, not look on with indifference? How does a loving being set up a trap or prohibit knowledge or punish creations for being how they were made? If God loved man, why did he create and allow the devil? How could a just God punish innocent descendants and for the crime of pursuing knowledge, which is the lifeblood of progress? Is cursing a whole race to damnation because one of them ate fruit once, uh, because one of them once ate fruit, a just action? Is this God praiseworthy? Doesn't this story celebrate ignorance and misogyny? For example, thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. If God was able to make a heaven somewhere, why couldn't he make this world heaven? I'm repeating some stuff here, but how is free will an obstacle here but not in heaven? Also, see all of biology, history, archaeology, see the stories, Babylonian and Sumerian sources that it was taken from, and multiple spliced together strands, and the book, geology, etc. Um,
Mhm.
oh, and I have some quotes here from Ehrman, kind of expanding on what was mentioned there from him. Quotes from that book. So he says, "If I have food because God has given it to me, and then don't others lack food because God has chosen not to give it to them?
Mhm.
What would we think of an earthly father who starved two of his children and fed only the third one, even though there was plenty of food to go around? What would we think of the fed child expressing her deeply felt gratitude to her father for taking care of her needs when her two siblings were dying of malnutrition before her eyes? When a survivor of a tragedy thanks God for saving them, what about those other poor souls who had their arms and legs ripped off and their brains splattered next to you? By thanking God for your fortune, are you implicating him for the misfortune of others?" It's from Bart Ehrman, God's Problem.
Well, that's
Um,
beautiful. And I mean, it really
Most
shows.
people who believe in God, yeah,
No, I was going to say, like, it
go ahead.
really shows how this is, like, a lot of religious people claim that science is arrogant. But I mean, what's more arrogant than thinking you know the creator of the universe, it knows you, and it cares about you, and all of this is for you and was set in motion so that disaster could happen, so you could be spared to go on and do something for this God. I mean, come
Right.
on.
Most people who believe in God-given free will and use it to explain suffering also believe in an afterlife. Presumably, people in the afterlife will still have free will, and yet there won't be suffering, allegedly then. We are told God intervenes in history and scripture and miracles. Is this not interfering with free will? How can you explain drought, earthquakes, tsunamis, malaria, cancer, birth defects? What does human free will have to do with it? These are some of the same points that I was making. But
Hmm.
last quote from him: sometimes something good can come out of suffering. At the same time, I'm absolutely opposed to the idea that we can universalize this observation by saying that something good always comes out of suffering. The reality is that most suffering is not positive, does not have a silver lining, is not good for the body or mind, and leads to wretched and miserable, not positive outcomes.
Yeah, and it's so true. I mean, what is the point of, like we talked about, eating and breathing and talking through the same hole? What is the point of us needing to eat food? I mean,
Uh huh.
that causes more suffering than anything.
Right. Moving on to prayer. Do you want to read this one?
Yeah, I can.
We're about
Contemplate.
halfway through the presentation here, so
Okay.
this is going to be a
Contemplating
long one.
prayer. It's all good. I may need to take a bathroom break here after this
That's
one.
fine.
Just
Yeah.
uh, contemplating prayer, a plethora of questions ensues. If one believes everything happens according to their God's perfect will and plan, isn't praying asking that we alter that perfect will and plan? If he's already aware of what has and will happen, why let him know? Is he not the cause of the problem in the first place, or the one who allowed it to happen and did nothing? Why do supposed answered prayers occur at the rate of chance? And why, when tested via controlled studies, are prayers shown not to work? Why don't hospitals employ faith healers? Why is there never any miraculous healing except in cases where the cause could be something else, like many diseases that naturally subside? And the miracles can't be verified. Limbs are never regrown unless you're a salamander. Won't it rain eventually, whether or not you pray for it, depending on the forecast, not your prayer? And that has saved, actually, weather forecasts save a lot of innocent children from being slaughtered trying to control the weather. So, that's a good point to make, too. Would believers ever rely solely on prayer? Would they want government leaders or doctors to do so? Would answered prayers interfere with supposed free will? What if you're praying to the wrong God or in the wrong sect? Aren't there many instances where tangible action could be taken, but all we hear are thoughts and prayers? Has prayer ever been demonstrated to do anything beyond serving as a placebo or show of solidarity? That's very good. I mean, if you're in a disaster, do you want a truck full of supplies to show up, or one full of thoughts and prayers? I think we know the answer.
Right.
Why do children pray for something as simple as rain in places such as Africa, but never get it and die? While ignoring those children, why would a God respond to the prayers and choose sides in football games, wars, or that raise you so desperately want? Why would this God choose to favor one and punish others, the other team, the other army, your coworker, so that you will benefit? Isn't the God paradigm rather like a mayor of a town choosing who will eat, succeed, or even live? Is that a moral, attractive, or in the least bit supportable conception of how the universe works? How about children in prayer, thanking the Heavenly Father for sparing them while their siblings beside them have either been slaughtered or allowed to be slaughtered by this Father? Or when children that have been fed, thanking the Father for food while their siblings beside them are laying dead of starvation? What of a Father who never goes away and who keeps his children as children eternally, never letting them grow up? How would an earthly Father with equal characteristics fare and be viewed in the world? And that last part is so good. It's an example I often use when having discussions is, I ask people, do I deserve to be burned or not? And they usually have these few answers they go to. And normally it gives me an opportunity to ask them this, like, look, would you or someone you cared about be happy dating someone who said you must love me or I will set you on fire? No. So why
Right.
then do you want to spend eternity with someone who will do that when you wouldn't even go on one more date with the other person who wants to do that to you? How do you reason that out? And it does sadly just go back to might makes right.
Right. Moving on to hell. How is a finite crime deserving of an eternal punishment?
Uh-huh.
Um, people use hell in comparison with the criminal justice system. They say, like, you don't accept hell, but we throw people in prison when they do bad things.
I've
Okay,
heard that
so
a lot. Yeah.
so at present we have to lock people up who are in danger to others, as there is yet no better alternative. The runners and creators of our criminal justice systems didn't create criminals and their minds and their nature, knowing exactly how they'd be, and then punish them for being how they made them, as is the case with God. We don't punish people for what they don't believe, which is an involuntary action, which a God would know, much less for eternity, especially on bad, vague, conflicting, or absent evidence, and expect them to put all that together just right, as is the case with God. Our modern enlightened criminal justice systems consider proportionality in cruel and unusual punishment, unlike with God. God theoretically could have made any type of world it wanted, where there was free will and no sin, as is apparently the case in heaven. Man, I've repeated that point a few times.
It's true
or
though.
no, or only limited constructive suffering, but it set up a world where the vast majority of billions of good people and perhaps life on other planets will burn and suffer forever for the unsolicited crime of being born. And this is ultimately the lovely state of existence and the universe that this lovely God created.
Mm-hmm.
And we've made this point too, but when it comes to moral accountability, Christianity has nothing to do with it, as a serial killer can come to Jesus on death row and be in heaven, while a doctor from Doctors Without Borders, who spends their life helping people, burns forever. Even if you wanted to say hell is separation from God, if God is ultimate goodness and love, this is still egregious and cruel punishment. And yes, our will is very limited, which a God would know, and psychopaths are indeed unlucky to have the brains they do, though we indeed may make scientific progress there. When it comes to building a better world, hell is the ultimate tribalism and probably the worst idea ever invented. It's anathema to human unity and is an eternal generator of hate, fear, inhumanity, and division. Read history and watch the news.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, you can't say it any better.
Mm-hmm. You want to read that one?
Yeah, I can. A Christian supposes that we stand before an all knowing and all powerful God. This God then would be responsible for everything, would he not? A supreme scientist makes an experiment and creates a universe, and he's somehow not responsible, particularly one with perfect foreknowledge. I don't think any devil or any mythology saves this point. The curiosity of why the devil is yet to be defeated, except to serve the story and maintain the narrative, has long been observed. This excuse sees further embarrassment from lines such as these: I form the light and create darkness. I bring prosperity and create disaster. I, the Lord, do all these things. Isaiah 45:7. Believe before it's too late, I've been told. Other hells of other religions don't seem to bother these people. Virtually the entire modern developed world has agreed that thought crime is untenable and unacceptable, that it's actions that should be judged, character, not thoughts or beliefs.
Well, I wanted to amend that a little bit. Character should be judged to some extent, but it should not be punished. You know,
Yeah,
yeah, like that. Yeah.
exactly. Meanwhile, believers, whether they're aware of it or not, worship a Nazi sadistic deity that would torture or allow to be tortured billions of people just for not believing something. That's such a good point. Particularly something unbelievable and unsupported. A deity that plays hide and seek games of credulity, who essentially created conscious beings to reside in a place of eternal torment that he created, devised, or allowed for, being how he made them. Again, a supreme scientist who plays cruel lab experiments on his creations. If this really is how the universe works, if it is really ruled by such a monster, then the preference and superiority of never being born could be said to be valid. For everything else that can be said about the hideous doctrine that's done so much harm and is advocated clearly by the Prince of Peace, it's got nothing to do with anything constructive or noble, of reform or protection or prevention. It's pure, unimaginably brutal vengeance, and it is vexing how it benefits anyone or anything but a God's sadism, though St. Thomas Aquinas pondered cheerfully about the felicity of the saved being served by their ability to gaze from heaven at the torment of those tortured souls burning below. Could you stand to witness the torture of someone you love for even a few minutes? And that last part really does show that it is man-made, and it was made by barbaric people who really did have no clue to what was going on.
Yeah. And that and this is from my book from the same chapter, by the way. Yeah, you said that you were kind of a big fan of that chapter, so you might
Hmm.
recognize some of this.
Yeah.
You want to read this one, or you want me to get it?
Can you read it while I go use the restroom real quick? I'll be right back.
Yeah, absolutely. Once upon a time, a reportedly brilliant man named Pascal made an utterly fallacious argument for not God, but belief in God in the form of a wager based on the idea of hell. The wager proposes that you should believe in God because you'll suffer if he does exist and you don't believe in him. It's a safe bet. It's rather easily destroyed. Number one, you could be worshiping the wrong God, angering it, and giving the plurality of gods and sects probability is fairly high you are. Number two, a God would know if you're pretending and may not like being lied to. Number three, related to number two, you can't easily will yourself to believe what you do not. One is either truly convinced of a proposition or not. A God would know that. Number 4, you're assuming the existence of many other things aside from a deity, such as an afterlife and what specific kind of afterlife scenario there may be. Number 5, utility or comfort of a belief does not prove a belief true. Number 6, this kind of thinking could justify believing in anything. Do, believe, or else. Number 7, the betrayed paradise may not be worth going to. The gods of religions as we are off the gods of religions as we see are often monsters that deserve to be fought and condemned even as fiction. You'll be doing master worship while billions of good people, including loved ones, burn. Will you be a celestial automaton? Number 8, you will waste a lot of time and resources and miss out on much in life if you believe and you're wrong. You'll have wasted it on a lie and a falsehood. Number 9, believers have no guarantee they'll gain salvation for believing in and worshiping a God, even if they have the right one. Sects of the same religion, such as Catholic and Protestant, literally war over their religion's self-contradictory foundational texts as to what is required for salvation. Number 10, a God might not be as reminiscent of a petulant earthly tyrant as he is presented in the holy books. A God might value an honest, courageous, truth-seeking mind to a calculating, lying, fearful, or hypocritical dogmatist or unthinking slave. It may frown upon using fear and threats of violence. It may not even desire absolute and incessant worship and flattery and self-debasement from its own creations.
It's very true. Yeah. That last one too is also a good point to use when people try to, when you get into a religious argument, sometimes you can whittle them down to say, well, of course, not all of the Bible is true. And then you have to ask them, well, how do you choose which parts of that? And that's where you can ask, would this God want me to lie to him just in case? I mean, surely the answer is no. That's in the 10 Commandments. Don't lie. So,
right. The multiplicity of religions. So somebody says, I felt God in my life. I would ask the person that makes the statement to try to be logical and objective. These ideas have likely been drilled into you from birth. Is it really surprising that you attribute good things and feelings to God, your particular God? How do you know it's this God? Here's betting you not be attributing them to this particular God had you been born in India or in Greece 2,500 years ago. The religious always talk about God, automatically assuming that the God there is their God. They don't even think about it. Yet in reality, it takes many unsupported leaps to get from something one could call a God to the God of the religion you happen to adhere to. Hindus, whose religion is far older, never seem to see images of Jesus or Virgin Mary. Wonder why that is. Might it just be because the gods and characters of different religions are products of humans and human culture, and this is why geography is such a key factor in which religion one holds to? The fact is, people of mutually incompatible and vastly different religions and beliefs who believe in different gods all have religious experiences. They all look more or less the same. Feelings are not evidence. Similar feelings are evoked by, I guess they're a kind of evidence, but definitely not conclusive evidence. Yeah. Similar feelings are evoked by nature or art and can be induced by drugs. There is such a blind and arrogant loss of objectivity with people that they think that they can draw objective conclusions about the universe from their own subjective experiences solely. They think they can refuse to consider or even learn about the objective scientific data. They refuse to consider that their interpretation of their experiences can be mistaken, or to consider the unreliability of the brain and consider all of the people who pursue nirvana, lost in meditation, expecting reincarnation, or those who follow Allah, whose holy book tells them they will go to hell if they believe Jesus was divine. One would think a God, particularly a wise, all-knowing, and benevolent one, would have sent the same message since the beginning. Everyone everywhere would have always known it, and there would be no doubt that that message, that book, if a book, which entails a mistranslation and human interpretation, is for some reason necessary, and that God exists and are the right ones. There would not be the multitude of religions past and present that there are. Childhood indoctrination and conquest, one would think, would not be the primary ways in which religions have spread, but they have been. People make excuses such as free will had to be maintained, yet holy books describe deities who want to send their message and save people. People still would have the choice to embrace and follow the God that exists, but we can't even know which is right or which, if any, is even real. For some bizarrely irrational reason, God sees fit to only speak to people one person at a time. Our situation is one of getting threats, the mark of a questionable doctrine, made by various questionable spokesmen, always men, who claim to write and speak for various mutually incompatible, all powerful, benevolent yet invisible and mute deities. To pass the test before us, we're left with vague, contradicting, or no material to study or prepare. The problems continue for Christianity and the religions that preceded or were contemporary with it. The dying and rising God theme, including the dying and rising Savior, Son of God, was common and widespread long before Jesus, and the Greek authors who authored, for example, the Gospels, would have known about, the Greek mythology and other types of mythology around the area.
Oh yeah, and I mean, if you notice too, it's all centered in that one area that's a very tiny part of the global landscape, and it all happened right there.
Right. Can you see this? Do you want to read it?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
Isn't our society founded on God and Christianity? Christianity is about obedience and authority, even submission to worldly authority, which is assigned by God, not freedom. The Abrahamic God is a tyrant. Scripture says nothing about democracy, and Christian history is one of massacring people for incorrect views and in no way preaches freedom of religion. Christianity has, and the Bible does, subject women and condone slavery. Christianity commands faith, not questioning, contrary to science and philosophy, and condemns affluence and striving for wealth while preaching to stay in your station in life, quite contrary to capitalism. The focus and goal is the next life, not the betterment of this life and this world. No, the Enlightenment was the womb of modernity and our modern values and institutions, emerging from the midst of religious violence, intolerance, and oppression, and armed with discoveries and exploration that revealed other cultures and religions, together with rediscoveries of pre-Christian classical texts with ideas that actually did presage and argue for many of our modern values and even scientific findings, advances in biblical criticism, and the discoveries of science and a spreading scientific mindset. People discovered they could think for themselves. People discovered ancient traditions could be wrong and harmful, and that this world can be improved, and it's within our capacity to do so. The Bible and Christian culture saw this as a vain and this world as fallen. Thinkers saw the enormous world transforming power. A thinker saw the enormous world transforming power of science compared with the empty assertions and circular excuses of religion and theology, which never advanced or discovered any knowledge or proved any claim. They realized freedom and democracy were better, though they're no though they're nowhere advocated for in the Bible, that the order of things on earth is not divinely ordained, despite the Bible and Christianity long preaching that it is. See the divine right of kings. The Bible and Christianity ruled over the Dark Ages, suffocating thought and freedom. Reforms didn't happen for hundreds of years, and only when secular thinkers started making secular arguments and Christianity started losing its power. Our modern world traces back to the point where people woke up and realized there is a foundation of a common humanity in a common world with better and worse ways to navigate it as a socially interconnected species. And that reason and evidence, not revelation, dogma, or authority, are our best guides. As the great historian of the Enlightenment, Jonathan Israel, has shown, it was the most radical an atheistic element of the Enlightenment and the works of atheists like the Holbach, Diderot, Helvetius, and I cannot pronounce the last guy's name. Okay, that were central in giving rise to modern conceptions of tolerance and cosmopolitanism that were enshrined in that 1948 UN Declaration of Human Rights and sparked in the American and French revolutions. And that's so true. You think about the UN and some of these countries that have been on human rights councils have, had this kind of power. And, like Saudi Arabia is the easiest one most people know about. I mean, women just got allowed to drive over there, 2 or 3 years ago, and they still behead gay people, and yet they're our allies. How does that work?
Yeah, we got some questionable allies, no doubt about that. Here's a quote from Jonathan Israel from Enlightenment Contested, and we both have this book. I don't think you've read it yet.
No, I haven't got to it yet.
Nothing could be more fundamentally mistaken as well as politically injudicious than to endorse the deeply mistaken notion that European or Western values should be recognized as essentially Christian values, the religion of the papacy, the Inquisition, and Puritanism. Any crisis of modern morality can much more compellingly be shown to result from the continuing and fierce worldwide resistance to the equity and equality, as well as democracy of the radical Enlightenment stream's common good. That quest may be defeated in the end, but if so, it will be due at least partly to the failure to teach humanity about the historical origins and true character of the modern ideas of democracy, equality, individual freedom, full toleration, liberty of expression, anti-colonialism, and our universalist secular morality based on equity. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Equity has no place in the Abrahamic faith. It just feels like it's not even possible, really, in many ways. It's really sad.
Yeah, I don't know why my notes keep like going away, so I got to pull them up again. Give me a sec.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, those books about Jonathan Israel are massive, but they are very good.
Yeah, they're definitely going to be gotten to later this year, I'm hoping. I just have such a huge backlog, and so I get pulled in so many directions reading.
Right.
It's a good problem to have.
Yeah, I'd say so. Okay. When laws and rights were unquestionable divine edicts, they were implemented or removed by self-proclaimed divinely appointed rulers, done with little regard for facts or real-world consequences. When seen for what laws and rights are, beneficial human inventions that we necessarily come to in order to enjoy the benefits of society, they can be seen as improvable, and thus society does improve. For the Enlightenment thinkers, even some of them still invoked a vague God of nature, but it was verifiable nature, real human needs and desires, not appeasing a God, that became foundational. And universal laws and standards founded in demonstrable facts and our factual common humanity make for bad bedfellows when combined with invented human religions claiming that all but they will burn forever and that they alone possess fantastical and unverifiable alternative truths. A couple more related notes I jotted down. People try to tell me, you're a cultural Christian whose morality is based on Christianity, even though you might reject its metaphysical claims. That's not true. I'm against basing life on faith, authority, or blind obedience. I'm against human sacrifice and deeply against the whole idea of hell. I find cannibalistic and vampiristic rituals distasteful. I think condemning innocent descendants immoral. I'm not okay with slavery or misogyny. I don't believe in rendering unto Caesar no matter what, or that Caesars have been placed on earth by God. I'm not for murdering heretics or hating or abandoning family if they believe differently. I don't think it's wise or healthy to preach the imminent end of the world. I'm for teaching microorganisms as the cause of sickness, not demons. And I think the existence of exorcists is comically horrific. I don't think rape victims should marry their rapist. And I'm for investigation, not revelation.
Yeah, I mean, that's all
I'm sure
amazing.
you'd echo all of that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, think about it like if
Yeah.
what these Christians are telling us is true, then all that horrible stuff is happening on purpose by the very being you're told to love and forced to love. That is sadomasochism defined.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just insanity.
A couple more quotes related on this. This is from Steven Pinker, "The Better Angels of Our Nature," the best book ever written, or the most inspirational in my book still. Is it your conviction that small town life centered on church tradition and fear of God is our best bulwark against murder and mayhem? Well, think again. As Europe became more urban, cosmopolitan, commercial, industrialized, and secular, it got safer and safer. A quote from Albert Einstein from the book Ideas and Opinions: "The existence and validity of human rights are not written in the stars. They are ideals and convictions conceived by enlightened individuals, which resulted from historical experience. The struggle for human rights is an eternal struggle which may never be won, but to tire in that struggle would mean the ruin of society."
Yeah. And I mean, you think about, rights do not come from the divine. It's what people have literally died for here.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
This one?
Next one, religious liberty. You can read that if you want.
Okay. What if your religion required you to not serve people of a certain race? What if your religion required you to kill those of another religion? Religious liberty. See the problem? We all have the right to believe whatever we want and to do whatever we want equally under the law up until we start to infringe on the rights of others. Religion is no longer above or equal to the state, it's under it and separated from it. Your religious liberty has limits, just like all liberty does necessarily in a society. That religion is subordinate to the state in the West is a clear and undeniable example of the loss of power and credibility of religion. From the religious perspective, there should be nothing more important and authoritative than their religion, for it concerns things far more important than anything else, including your very eternal soul. There could be no toleration of other false ideas for the sake of fairness and peace. This world is doomed, after all, and is always about to meet that doom. The way things are now could only be due to attrition from thousands of years of religious war and persecution, and the Savior still not having shown up, and religion being humbled in its collision with modernity and secular democratic politics, and a powerful new scientific outlook and knowledge helping illuminate how all religions have the same lack of evidence, how they make disproven claims, how they have very human origins. And so it makes sense. Peace and prosperity and freedom and fairness in the only world and life we know we have should be what our laws and society should be geared toward. Though people can have their unsupported, unbelievable, and contradictory cultural beliefs and stories, for all the noise, people in the modern Western world do not take their religion anywhere near as seriously as they used to. And that is a very good point. Because if you'll notice, we call someone a good Christian based on how little of that holy book they actually follow.
Right.
Like they pretty much already have to throw half of it out just for starters. I mean, that
Mhm.
should be very telling. You would think it would be.
Yeah. And Christians want to make the Christian nationalists, dominionists, they want to make a Christian Sharia law for America. Well,
Hmm.
Sharia law, of course, involves enslavement of women, execution of gays, female genital mutilation. It's contrary to human rights, to free democratic government. Um, and also the people that call that out about Islam and about Sharia law, it doesn't have a damn thing to do with racism or intolerance, but a tolerance of intolerance. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
and the
yeah,
hatred
man.
and bigotry that flows from those ideas, the
Yeah,
doctrines of the religion of Islam.
yeah. Like anybody can be a Muslim. You don't have
Yeah.
to just
I
be.
mean, no other apostate from any other religion.
Yeah,
Right.
it's wild
And
though.
no
That's
other
a
apostate from any other religion in the world faces the danger
yeah,
that
and I mean what
apostates
you
from
said
Islam do.
is
There's only
so
one
true
religion.
because like for all that noise, they really do not take it seriously because it says in many parts that you're supposed to kill people that think like us, or at the very least, you should exclude them from the society because they're a danger. And just how is like every time I see that bumper sticker that says coexist, I get not mad but like lightly salted.
It's
It's
kind
like
of like we
how
have the right idea, but we can't get to the unity through this path.
yeah, I mean it's just even the three major ones that all worship the same Abrahamic God
Kind
all
of. Yeah.
disagree. Like Judaism, as far as I can remember, doesn't have like a Christian or uh, Muslim hell. It's a little different, but every single Muslim who really takes it serious believes the other two parties are done for. Same thing with Christianity. I mean, how do they solve? How can these? How can everything that's on that bumper sticker coexist when three of them can't even coexist with the same deity?
Right.
How will that work?
Yeah, I just think it's so obvious the idea of God. It's just us voicing our human experiences, emotions, and predispositions onto the universe. Um, I
And it's
think
a powerful whole
I
idea.
think psychologically, Freud probably had a bit of a point when he said religion comes in large part from children growing up to learn their once seemingly immense and seemingly all-powerful parents are just imperfect humans, and they're uncomfortable with the uncertainty, insecurity, and responsibility that adulthood entails. So they project that desire for the parent onto the universe. It's more complicated than that, but that's an aspect of it, I think.
Oh yeah, I think fear of death and the fear of punishment you may face after death is the main driving force of why it's still here. Like Abrahamic followers can say whatever they want, but fear is the greatest motivator. And without that motivation there, I highly doubt the numbers would still be in the billions.
Yeah. You want to read this one?
Yeah. The Constitution versus the Bible. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. This violates the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, restricting freedom of religious expression. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. This violates the First Amendment's guarantee of the freedom of speech, of which artistic expression and the golden trump that we just saw is included by precedents of many Supreme Court cases. Mm-hmm. It also brings to mind what the Taliban did, destroying ancient religious relics, some beautiful art, by the way, not approved by their Islamic masters, and Christian art and crucifixes, Catholics, etc. Visiting the inequity of the fathers upon the children into the third and fourth generation. This violates the most fundamental principle of Western jurisprudence developed over centuries of legal precedents that one cannot be guilty of the sins of one's parents, grandparents, or anyone else. Thou shalt not kill, says the genocidal war deity who commands and has caused so much killing, who makes these commandments on penalty of death, and whose people he would cause to slaughter each other right after their pronouncement. Moses and the boys, thou shalt not commit adultery, coming from a deity who impregnated someone else's fiancée. Thou shalt not covet, the world's first thought crime, which goes against centuries of Western legal codes. The very foundation of capitalism is coveting, and that's the 10th commandment. I mean, that's thought crime, and it lumps women in with livestock. That is very telling, very telling.
On societal health, I'm not going to read all of this. This is just like different studies, and I brought this over from my book. But just to make the point that
the UNICEF studies, those are great.
Many studies, studies and meta studies. The most religious nations are among the most unstable, violent, oppressive, and poor. The more belief and the more intensive belief correlates with more oppression and more economic failure. Less belief and less intense belief means more peace, more tolerance, and more economic success. I'm going to skip to the bottom. This is from Phil Zuckerman, who lived in Sweden, and he and other places, and he studied how people in Sweden don't care about God, don't believe in God, most of them, and all Scandinavia, much of Western Europe, frankly, and places like Japan. Best countries. But between 500 and 700 million people currently have no belief in any gods. That can say so. These non-believers mostly come from the safest, healthiest, most educated, most charitable, most technologically advanced, and crime-free nations on Earth. Any believer who claims that religion is necessary for a nation's societal well-being needs to explain why nearly every measure of social well-being points to exactly the opposite conclusion. The most religious societies have the most problems. The most atheistic have the least.
Mm-hmm. It's no doubt about it.
And this is not confusing correlation and causation. It's simply pointing out, if you want to say that religion is required or guaranteed to make things better, no, like the stats don't show that.
Yeah, it's as bad as saying you have to have religion for morality. I mean, it's just there's no way you can rationalize it.
Right. Oh, I did have some notes. Let me see if I can pull this up real quick. Okay. I don't know if they were worth getting into or not, but societal health. Oh, this is just like a quote from his book. Societies exist right now, and they're not the only ones. Just below the Arctic Circle between Torshavn and Liepaja in Scandinavia, wherein most people don't believe much in God, don't accept the supernatural claims of religion, seldom go to church, and live their lives in a largely secular culture, wherein death is calmly, if not stoically, accepted as simply a natural phenomenon, and the meaning of life is nothing more or less than what you make it. The existence of this relatively irreligious society suggests that religious faith, while widespread, is not natural or innate to the human condition, nor is religion a necessary ingredient for a healthy, peaceful, prosperous, and deeply good society. Phil Zuckerman, Society Without God, What the Least Religious Nations Can Teach Us About Contentment.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a very good point, because like a lot of people want to say, since we've had religion for so long, it's obviously, what we have to have, and I disagree. It's just what happens when you don't have the knowledge. I mean, if
Mhm.
you see a bolt of lightning come from the sky and set that tree on fire, and you have no idea what lightning or fire is, what else could you think but magic or a deity? I mean, and just, like that whole thing of the God punishing us, I think comes from that too. The randomness of nature. When that village you don't like gets hit by the mudslide and wiped out, and you get spared, it's very much more likely that you're going to dig in further to whatever God your particular, village had at the time, because that would seem like evidence when you can't reason it out. That's something I wish more people would think on, is just what's more likely, that people who didn't know where the sun went at night were doing the best they could, or that, they have all the answers to everything? I mean, I think one is much more likely than the other.
Yeah. You want to read this one?
hmm the rationality of Christianity. God sacrificed himself to save us from himself and create a loophole for his own rules. No better way could be thought of, because an uncomprehending rib woman was convinced by a talking snake to eat fruit and pursue knowledge. Putting these things in place and knowing what would happen, then cursing all innocent descendants for it. Very rational, very blessed. A human or blood sacrifice that wasn't really a sacrifice somehow saves mankind, and most are still going to hell anyway. Magnificently rational. Sickness is caused by demons requiring exorcism. You don't need to wash your hands before eating. Mud and spit cure blindness. Faith makes you immune to poison. Quite rational. Having your story be so similar to dozens of gods and myths that came before you, so rational. Salvation depends on belief, which is involuntary, something a god would know, and bad, vague, contradicting, or no evidence, quite logical. Having your book be filled with barbarism and contradictions, necessarily logical. Allowing endless religions and sects, ingenious. Allowing your religion to have a comically horrific history spread by bloodshed, force, and accident, in which no one can still agree on much of anything, wise. A man God predicts his own return within the lives of his listeners 2,000 plus years ago now. Sensibly compelling. Three is one and one is three. Deeply comprehensible. For shame. An infinitely loving God allows and causes random atrocities and calamities, regardless of the victim's beliefs or virtue, the scale and depths of which would make most human beings' stomachs turn. Intellectually unassailable. A being is omni everything, that created all in perfect knowledge and power, yet makes mistakes, has regrets, and blames things on everyone else, mentally immaculate. Believing still that the ultimate answers must be magical and supernatural, despite this never being the answer up until now. Brilliant. Eschewing all the evidence of bottom up evolution and obstinately demanding complexity requires a designer who would be infinitely more complex, supremely reasonable. Holding or commanding faith as if this is a reliable path to truth above reason, revelation above investigation. Exactly the opposite of the means by which all of our progress has been made. Irreproachably sagacious. I love the
Christianity is the most rational thing. You can't, it's the foundation of everything. You can't understand the world without Christianity. Yeah.
man. Oh, I get tired of hearing that, man. Oh,
Yeah. Um, I don't know if I really. This is really small too. I don't know if I want to get into reading all of it. Let me see if I can skim. This is from my book too.
Yeah.
Um, just saying the Christianity spread mainly through force. You know, it got power with the
Mhm.
Roman emperors in the fourth century. Constantine, Theodosius, they outlawed paganism and heretical, what they deemed heretical Christianity. That the Nicene Creed went out, Catholicism went out.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Well, think of this
eh,
just real quick. The northern hemisphere where we live, how did Christianity first arrive here? The conquistadors, and it was
right.
way after the fact. I mean,
Hmm.
come on.
And it spread very little. It spread a little bit, but really it got to like 5 or 10% of the Roman Empire within 300 years of its existence, and didn't really explode until it was forcibly made to explode when the Roman
Mhm.
emperors, converted to Christianity.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah, for most of its history, Christianity has been oppressive and violent, like Stalinism, which Stalinism was brought about by centuries of cruel Christian czars. And by the
Yeah.
way,
Yeah,
people
it's his
talk
dog.
about, oh, the communists. Well, communism and Stalinism is a political religion that copies the worst parts of traditional religion. It's not reasonable at all. It perverted science. Like you had what was that? What's that
Yeah,
guy's
like
name?
biology claiming you could have 4 harvests in a year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's leader worship. It's dogma. They had heretics and heresy hunts. Um, all of that.
Yeah,
Um,
dogma is always the problem, man. If you'll notice, it's so shameful. It's usually
mhm.
almost always at the core of it.
And all the massive witch burnings, Jew and heretic burning, all the
Mm.
crusades lasted hundreds of years, witch burnings and inquisitions, and there were inquisitions all over the world, lasted hundreds of years. Imagine if they had modern weaponry, by the way, just like
Oh,
World War II weaponry. Yeah, that like
oh,
Stalin had. And people try to say, "Oh, it's just the Salem witch trial," and "Oh, it's just the Spanish Inquisition." No, it's
just
way more than that.
that.
um, Hysteria lasted hundreds of years, and there was a book called "The Malleus Maleficarum" or "Hammer of Witches," written by Catholic clergyman Heinrich Kramer, which is a bestseller for centuries, and it was the authoritative instruction manual for exterminating accused witches. Um,
Think of just that though, real quick. We're talking about, like imagine being Jesus and being on this earth and not telling people about microorganisms or not telling them, hey, the water that's brown, don't drink that. Like just imagine not telling people that. That is cruel.
yeah,
You would owe it to them to help them not
Jesus would
die.
have done a
So
lot more, just teaching people
yeah,
about washing their hands, and then just randomly healing a few people, and there was kids dying all around them.
I
You know,
know. It's
um,
unbelievable.
Christianity was the first Holocaust pertaining to the Jews. They invented anti-Semitism, and then the Nazis got their anti-Semitism from their Christian foundations. Martin
And it
Luther
shows
talked
the
very
power.
badly about the Jews.
Yeah, I mean, and it shows the power of how, like all of that came, if I'm remembering right, just from something in St. John's. It was like one small part led to all of that. Just like that one small part, that one verse in Exodus, I do not permit a sorceress to live. How many
Yeah,
women died because of that one fucking sentence? Think about that.
yeah.
One
And among
sentence.
pagans, there was more tolerance. There were many gods and cultures, no religious wars. Then we had people like Justinian who closed down the schools of philosophy that had been going on for centuries. We
Yeah.
had people like Charlemagne and the massacre of Verdun, wiping out pagans and forcibly
Oh, yeah.
converting them.
Or in
Uh,
Baghdad, like right before 1100, there was that one imam who said like manipulating numbers was the work of the devil, and that
mm,
set off a chain of catastrophic events that area has still not recovered from. Think about that. That's
yeah.
sad.
Hmm. And it's funny how, Jesus didn't reveal his salvation until 1492 to the Western Hemisphere. And look at how he did it.
And
Uh,
according to some of those different denominations, dying in ignorance of Jesus doesn't prevent you from going to hell. And then some
yeah.
say, well, if you don't know about him, you get to go if you were a decent person. So if that is the case, we would be better served never knowing about this idea of God.
And speaking about abuses, I mean, you can justify all of this by scripture very clearly and abundantly.
Exactly.
Um, this is a quote. I'm not going to read it all. It's another one from Shelley. It's from that same dialogue, Refutation of Deism.
Okay.
It's sufficiently evident that an omniscient being never conceived the design of reforming the world by Christianity. Omniscience would surely have foreseen the inefficacy of that system, which experience demonstrates not only to have been utterly impotent and restraining, but to have been most active in exhaling the malevolent propensities of men. During the period which elapsed between the removal of the seat of empire to Constantinople in 328 and its capture by the Turks in 1453, what solitary influence did Christianity exercise upon the world and was intended to enlighten? Never before was Europe the theater of such ceaseless and sanguinary wars. Never were the people so brutalized by ignorance and debased by slavery.
God, 1,100 years of nonsense.
Mm-hmm. You want to read these quotes from the Bible on Earth?
Mm-hmm. The process that we describe here is, in fact, the opposite of what we have in the Bible. The emergence of early Israel, I can't see it,
Was the outcome?
was the outcome of the collapse of the Canaanite culture, not its cause. And most of the Israelites did not come from outside Canaan, they emerged from within it. There was no mass exodus from Egypt. There was no violent conquest of Canaan. Most of these people who formed early Israel were local people, the same people whom we see in the highlands throughout the Bronze and Iron Ages. The early Israelites were, irony of ironies, themselves originally Canaanites.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's so good. Another one is now evident that many events of biblical history did not take place in either the particular area or the manner described. Some of the most famous events in the Bible clearly never happened at all. Yeah, that is devastating to their case. Uh, Finally, here, yet all agree that the Pentateuch is not a simple, seamless composition, but a patchwork of different sources, each written under different historical circumstances to express different religious or political viewpoints. Yeah, when you have a
Mm-hmm.
book by committee, it's going to look like the Bible does.
And this is all based on archaeology. This is from a book about archaeology and the findings. Um, yeah, and we can tell like there's anachronisms in the Bible, like that show that it's written like way after. Like they talk about in this book, like stuff was written like in the time of Josiah. A lot of it, like Deuteronomy, and a lot of it was written during the Babylonian exile, and then after, where they got ideas from the Zoroastrianism of the Persians, like when Cyrus liberated them, and they copied it. Like Satan became the devil, and before he was just like a helper or the adversary that God appointed. He was working for God, like in Job, doing what God was telling him to do. You know, when
Mm.
God cruelly was punishing Job and all of that.
Yeah, because they
Um,
needed a scapegoat. Yeah, like, the
yeah,
devil helped them understand while they were conquered, the alleged chosen people.
I think the earliest mention of the Jews is like the Maneas, still I think it's called, from ancient Egypt, and it's like the only mention that from the Egyptians about the Jews, and it's like one little thing, and I think it contradicts. It says like they were this small conquered people. I don't remember what it says exactly, but it's it's not well documented, and what's documented doesn't support what the Bible says on a lot of points.
But speaking of people meeting each other for the first time,
Let's
think
see.
about this. When I guess you could call them missionaries or spreaders of this faith, Judaism, Christianity, showed up in China trying to spread the word. They had no idea what they were walking into. I mean, that culture had a rule of law thousands of years before their Christian or Jewish oral traditions even began being passed down. So, I mean, like, how dare you walk up to this empire and try and tell them they're wrong when they
Right.
existed before your God did?
Hmm. If you want to read this, I'm going to step away for just a second.
Okay. On the Bible, one of the most amazing and perplexing features of mainstream Christianity is that seminarians who learn the historical critical method in their Bible classes appear to forget all about it when it comes time for them to be pastors. They are taught critical approaches to Scripture. They learn about the discrepancies and contradictions. They discover all sorts of historical errors and mistakes. They come to realize that it is difficult to know whether Moses existed or what Jesus actually said and did. They find that there are other books that were at one time considered canonical, but that ultimately did not become part of Scripture. For example, other Gospels and Apocalypses. They come to recognize that a good number of the books of the Bible are pseudonyms. For example, written in the name of an apostle by someone else. That in fact, we don't have the original copies of any of the biblical books, but only copies of copies made centuries later, all of which have been altered. They learn all of this, and yet when they enter church ministry, they appear to put it back on the shelf. Pastors are, as a rule, reluctant to teach what they learned about the Bible in seminary. In each gospel, Jesus has a different personality and take on his role. Was Jesus in doubt and despair on the way to the cross, Mark, or calm and in control, like it says in Luke? Did Jesus' death provide an atonement for sin, like it says in Mark and Paul, or did it not, like it says in Luke? Did Jesus perform signs to prove who he was, like it says in John, or did he refuse to do so, like it says in Matthew? Must Jesus' followers keep the law if they are to enter the kingdom, like it says in Matthew, or absolutely not, like it says in Paul? Yeah, the Bible can say on the same subject 2 or 3 different viewpoints, sometimes even in the same part of the Bible, sometimes just a few pages apart. It's really, really worrisome.
And that was written by Bart Ehrman. Jesus Interrupted is the book, and I highly recommend that book for an overview of biblical scholarship. He's one of the most famous biblical scholars in the world. He's a agnostic atheist, but he used to be an evangelical. He talks about there's more errors in the New Testament, or errors in the Bible, than there are words in the New Testament.
Yeah. And there's easily like 500 plus really solid contradictions too.
Yeah. I'm gonna need to step away again to get like a drink or something. But if you want to like kind of go through, you don't have to necessarily read all these, but kind of these are some of the barbarism in the Bible, some of the passages. But you know, the thing highlighted here: why can people variously interpret or find whatever they want in the Word of God? Because it's not, right?
Yeah. And most of the time, you'll notice what they think they found is just what they want to be true.
Right. Yep. You go ahead and pick whatever one's out. You know, this barbarism that you want. I'll be right back.
Okay. So looking at the screen here, we have quite a few choices. Yeah, I mean, just Ezekiel here, 9 verses 4 through 6. Slaughter old men, the young men and women, the mothers and children, or Deuteronomy. Kill the males, but women, children, and livestock are to be taken as spoils, literally listing women and children as spoils of war, which Yahweh has provided. I mean, is this the God of love, or is he pissed off? Is he bipolar? I'm not making light of that, but something is wrong with this ability. Something is very wrong here. Yeah, here we go. Timothy 6, 1 through 2. Slavery is fine. Literally what it says. Go look that up if you don't believe me. Exodus 21. Oh, this easily Exodus. I would say Exodus, Deuteronomy, and Leviticus. Probably the 3 worst chapters of any book ever. Just holy shit. Exodus 21, verses 20 through 21 says, slaves are your property. And it tells you that you can beat them as long as they don't die. I think it's you can beat them with a rod. If they die, it's your fault, and you have to like reconcile it somehow. But if they get up after a day or 2, you're good. So how does encouraging abuse help spread the faith? Because that's oftentimes, or at least what I've heard, people try and sort of give slavery a pass, either saying it wasn't really slavery, it was indentured servitude, or that slavery is how you teach those non-Christians how to be Christian by being a good master. Just contemplate that. How can anyone be a good master? There's only one way. That's with consent in the bedroom. There is no other way that you can be a good master to a slave. Another classic here of God's logic, Deuteronomy 22:29. I remember that. Rape victims must marry their rapist, but I think it has to be an unbetrothed rape victim, and there's a certain amount of shekels that you have to pay the dad, and it's a very low amount when you adjust for inflation. It's not good. It's not a good look. Rape is a crime against a woman. It is not a property crime against her father. If you disagree with this, kill yourself. That's the advice I have for you.
No, let's skip ahead to numbers 37, 31, 17 through 18. Now,
Mm.
therefore, kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman that hath known man by lying with him. But all the women, children that have not known a man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. And in some versions, I think it's the New Living, it calls them plunder. They are your plunder.
And of course, it talks about killing people that are non-believers in your own family and all of that.
Yeah, there's in Deuteronomy, it says, if you go to another village and you find one non-believer among them, you have to kill everyone there. Literally,
Yeah.
everyone.
The Bible has been widely deemed unreliable as actual history by scholars for 200 years. Those scholars were noting its problems long before then. Moses narrating his own death, for example. It's a product of collaborative, though haphazard editing, giving us the biblical contradictions and implications, such as the two contradictory creation accounts in Genesis 1 and 2, over centuries by people with different languages and ideas concerning God. It's long been the consensus of scholars that the Gospels were written long after Jesus' supposed lifetime by no one who was an eyewitness, or even claimed to be by no one that knew him. These were not written by objective, unbiased historians citing sources, but by propagandists trying to spread their message, their good news, since the word gospel. They were written in Greek and foreign lands about illiterate Aramaic speakers. You can see, they try to make the New Testament line up with the Old Testament. They put words of the Old Testament lines into Jesus' mouth, like the lines of the Psalms, "Why hast thou forsaken me?" It's full of historic improbabilities, perpetual irony and coincidence, cheesiastic and triadic structure and cycles that were poetic things to make everything line up and reflect each other, every part of the thing with the story, which is not how reality works. They conform to Ascension and Rank Raglan and other mythotypes. They were written by different people speaking to different groups. Matthew was the most Jewish, and John was the most anti-Semitic. And by John, Jesus is like a Superman, God. He calls himself God, and the other ones not so much. It's different.
Yeah, good old St. John's Gospel is where the anti-Semitism, I'm pretty sure, is most thoroughly laid out. Yeah.
I think in Matthew it does say that because Matthew has him Jesus resemble Moses a little bit, and has him say that uphold the Old Testament law and say not a jot or tittle will be changed in the kingdom to fulfill the law. Yeah,
I actually have it right here. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. Amen, I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest part of the smallest part of a letter will pass from the law until all things have taken place. Not a dot, not an iota will pass until all is accomplished. Whoever then relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But he who does them and teaches them shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Everything in the Old Testament still counts. He also says in John 7, I think it's 19, did Moses not give you the law and yet none of you are keeping it? So, I mean, come on, man,
The other gospels copied verbatim from Mark, the first gospel around 70 CE per scholars, and changed what they want. In the first gospel of Mark, it ends with a woman telling no one. Everything after, including the resurrection, was added later by a scribe. And many Bibles even indicate in footnotes that everything after Mark 16:8 is not found in our oldest manuscripts. And there is near unanimous agreement about that among scholars. And this is also evidence by itself that the Bible is not inerrant. And why would a deity inspire words and then not preserve them?
Why would he use the printing press or, well, before that, copying or oral traditions? I mean, there's got to be something better than that.
The epistles of Paul are the earliest writings about Christianity, still decades after the supposed time of Jesus. Paul also never met Jesus or claimed to, and everything is based entirely on visions in his head and the Old Testament. And half of his letters are believed to be forgeries. They say virtually, we get into mythicism here. They say virtually nothing about Jesus' life like the later Gospels do. and the post-Pauline letters, not even necessarily referring to him as an historical entity. He surely didn't know in the authentic letters he did write that these letters would be added to a New Testament and be sacred scripture. Also, like, he's always talking about what Paul says. He never refers to Jesus, my master.
Mm-hmm.
Scott, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Hey, Scott, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I don't know what happened.
Me neither. It just stopped for a little bit.
All right.
All right, we're back. Yeah.
Okay. Let me. All right. All right. What was I saying?
You were right at.
Oh, there's very little non-Christian historical evidence. There's like Josephus and a line or two that we know is a forgery. A couple other vague things. People talking about what some Christians that they barely knew who they were said. We can see. C.S. Lewis talked about Jesus had to be a liar, lunatic, or Lord. No, he could be honestly mistaken, honestly or intentionally misrepresented by later writers, or a fictional, non-existent person. Even if we can see that everything, Jesus' tomb was empty or whatever, as followers had visions of him and a movement was started, it's not a miracle by definition, the least probable explanation. And even if Jesus seemingly or actually rose from the dead, this would still not prove anything else true, that any other Christian doctrine, including that God rose him. It could be some other thing, aspect of reality we don't know about or something. The four canonical gospels are contradictory in salient details. Like the virgin birth is only mentioned via two entirely different stories in Matthew and Luke. They say the sun went out for 3 hours. There's no other record of it. Also, all the zombie saints rising from the dead.
Were they skeletons or were they returned to what they used to look like so people could recognize them? Or what happened when they died again? Did they have to be reburied? I mean, there's a lot of questions on that one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. As archaeology has found no evidence whatsoever of the biblical exodus or conquest of the Promised Land of Jericho or anywhere else, or many other key events described in the Bible, the consensus among scholars now that Moses and the patriarchs did not exist. There have been plenty of well-funded endeavors employed by the religious to prove this thing or that thing from the Bible, but all of them are more or less as unsupported as the Shroud of Turin, which carbon dating exposes inauthentic and fake. Also, the good in the Bible, like the Golden Rule, was preached hundreds of years before Jesus by Buddha, Confucius, Epictetus, Zoroaster, Pittacus, Rabbi Hillel, and others, in secular philosophy and even older religions. The Golden Rule, like so very much in the Bible, is simply not original to the Bible, and I don't know what is original to the Bible, actually.
Well, actually, you'll notice all of the things that are good in there are not unique to it. And all of the horrific stuff is very unique to it. Honor killing is very unique to theism. So it's just kind of something that's funny when you notice it.
Yeah. There's actually quite a lot that leaves much to be desired regarding the ethics of Jesus, at least on the variations of the character of Jesus that were crafted and written by anonymous gospel authors long after the period of Jesus' supposed existence. Biblical Jesus encouraged castration. Such as the early church father Origen, seem to have taken him to heart and castrated themselves. He said followers must hate their parents and themselves, encouraging people to abandon their families in direct contradiction to the commandment about honoring thy father and mother. He actually said he came not to bring peace but a sword, and through an allegory said his non-believers should be decapitated before him. Unlike, say, Socrates or Buddha, he quite graciously is indignant and threatens those who will not listen to him. He promised an eternal lake of fire for those who don't believe in him. He'll come back as a superhero, unleashing monsters and destruction upon the earth. He was rude to his mother. His ethics were not argued for, but backed up with raw threat, and not aimed at the bettering of humanity and the world, but on the imminent end of the world. It's also quite possible that before the ecumenical endeavors of Paul, if Jesus actually existed, he very well could have been speaking to Jews only. Again, he had no problem with Old Testament barbarism, upheld its law. He never, nor does the Bible, to my knowledge, ever praise intelligence, but demands submission and obedience. He seems to be against affluence all by itself, while things like commerce have been large factors in human progress and peace. Was the same God of the Old Testament, evil God. He never had a problem with slavery or misogyny. Think about washing your hands and sickness caused by demons. Yeah, not a very admirable character,
That
fictional or otherwise.
is just a bit of like cheap magic or something. I mean, that's just pitiful.
Yeah. As has been noted, how the God of the Bible is a limited idiot. He's all knowing, but continually can't see things coming and makes mistakes and has regrets and fits of rage. Um, he's not great enough that his chosen people don't constantly desire to cheat on him with Baal and other gods. In Judges 1, he's not powerful enough in one instance to stop enemies because they have iron chariots. And he doesn't seem to know anything about the world or universe beyond the area in which the people who created him also knew. What is his deal about penis foreskins and why make penis foreskins in order for them to be cut off? A book that is a product of omniscience doesn't contain anything that couldn't have been written by the men of the time in which the Bible was written. There's no internal evidence of divinity or external evidence of its claims. In fact, many ideas seem to have been borrowed later from the likes of Plato and Aristotle. Um, da, 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 da. It's plagiarized origins as revealed by comparative religion, confirmed scientific and historical errors like human origins, water and plants before light, the sky being a firmament of flat earth set on fixed foundations. Um,
Insanity to think that. And like, there's another one that's really good. And I got this example from Neil Tyson. It says somewhere in Revelation that a sign of the end times is that the stars will fall to earth. And it's because they thought they were bits of light in the dome. I mean, a star will not be falling to earth. We will be sucked into it and will be torn apart long before we even touch it. So to even write that means you have no idea how the universe works at all.
Yeah. Talking about prophecies, again, regarding what's in the New Testament and in that time compared to the Old Testament, it's not hard to make your stories match what's already there in the Old Testament.
And they still mess that up a lot.
Yeah, and there were also many sects of Judaism in that time that had different expectations and stuff. That's I've said. Regarding prophecies, beyond that, there's examples of failed prophecies like the Nile River never dried up, and as in Zechariah 10:11, Damascus was not only still a city, it's one of the oldest continually inhabited cities. Isaiah 17:1. The Bible condones genocide and has instructions on how to keep slaves and sell your daughter into it, sacrifice animals. Yahweh loved the smell of burnt flesh, the blood sacrifices he demanded, stone and eat children, shrimp prohibition, yet not a word on DNA or boiling water in a very large book. As Roger Ingersoll said, if people didn't insert their own standards in place of Holy Scripture, if they followed it literally, they followed the New Testament literally, they'd be in an insane asylum. If they followed the Old Testament literally, they'd be locked up in prison
or dead. I mean,
I'd say to people to investigate. Investigate early groups like the Gnostics, and also the Marcionites, who believed there were many gods and the God of the Old Testament was evil. The Carpocratians were talked about, and they apparently ritually swapped spouses. Rediscover all the heretical books that are not in the Bible, the Apocrypha, books of Judas, Mary, Thomas, not the official word of God, simply because councils didn't include them. Like the book of Revelation barely got included, and there was like another book of, I think, Revelation of Peter or something that had like a giant talking cross or something. And it was like really popular for a long time and didn't get included. And the councils of man that invented and decided things like Christ's divinity, Sunday is holy day, Easter, the Trinity, Christmas, such as Nicaea and Constantinople in 381.
Stealing from pagans, taking all their days and making them theirs to ease transition.
And you can ask how would things have been if the Gnostics had won out. This is from it's small, but it's from a blog I did about the gloom and doom of Christianity. So Christianity sees the world as irredeemably fallen and man is inherently broken. The Age of Enlightenment challenged this notion and recognized and promoted the fact that humans have made immense progress and done amazing things. It championed basing our views on facts and data and showed that when we use these factual foundations, we can better ourselves in the world. There's no problem with our hearts, as Christianity asserts. Civilization works because the majority of us work together, have innate empathy, recognize our common humanity. Violence has long been declining, but the violence and failures we see are due not to some magical incident in a garden that stains us, but due to the fact that we are animals, risen apes, not fallen angels. Aside from aligning with the evidence, which is our leverage on the future, isn't this uplifting and inspiring view much more open in its potential?
Yes.
Christianity sells itself as a cure for maladies it invented, like the obsession with spiritual activities that don't require it, like sex. Sex is the reason we exist. Sex will always be a part of our nature. Um, Christianity created situations like, for example, where young, unwed, pregnant mothers killed themselves or their babies to avoid the opprobrium they would face from their Christian societies. Young gay people face the same stigma. Suicide is too often the escape. But walking with your head down, thinking you're a sinning worm because you're human, that's fit for flames unless you submit to a totalitarian authority, makes you willing prey for the alliance of kings and priests that the Enlightenment largely demolished. If you think that was a better world, a time when Christianity reigned, absolutely go check the Islamic world today and see how you like that. They both create the darkness that they say that they're fighting against, or that they diagnose. Um, Diderot said, "What moral accountability is there in a body of beliefs that encourages crimes by the ease in which it grants absolution, that sends a man who has committed injuries against mankind to ask forgiveness of God?" Bertrand Russell notes that the more religious and dogmatic the society, the worse is the cruelty and state of affairs. As the world has gotten more secular, it's gotten better. And the most secular countries today put the most religious ones to shame on every metric. Much of the reason for this is undoubtedly because these societies take care of their citizens and create pathways to flourishing in this life, so they don't fling themselves in desperation or ignorance into a religion they've been taught from birth is their only salvation in a fallen world. So, whether or not the universe is so poorly and absurdly constructed that a serial murderer on death row will be absolved if at last he accepts unsupported fairy tales while infidels are damned, we can't know with absolute certainty. More certain is the fact that we need to educate and empower people and teach them about their common humanity and how the benefits of virtue and cooperation provide demonstrable means to flourish. We will never have a better world if religions keep telling people that this world is the only one we get isn't what really matters. That
Mm-hmm.
those who believe differently will burn forever. That blissful eternal servitude is the end goal rather than reaping and creating all that actual reality offers. That they are broken playthings. That their only salvation lies in quashing their reason and obeying.
Yep. And, that's a very good point, those last two sections, because think of just in our state land in Tennessee, where I cannot remember his name. He's in our House of Representatives. And it's the third time now this prick is trying to make the Bible the official state book. Now, it has no chance of passing. It's a cheap way to try and appeal to voters. And the fact that this is going to sway people to vote for him because he keeps winning wherever he's from is just, it shows the horror in a rather, sort of mundane way, but not really, of this religion. Think of how much time is wasted, how much good could have been done, how much taxpayer money is gone due to this one ignorant person gibbering and jabbering, doing nothing. And that's just one person who has this faith rattling around in their lawmaking brain. I mean, is it any wonder we're staring at this crazy mess we are?
Mm-hmm. So, God, the great distraction. When I look at the world with a truly open mind, always constrained by a necessary skepticism, and I break out of the box I've been put in, when I stop worrying about how phenomena may relate to or support or not support our species' favorite fictional character, I find studying it is far more enjoyable and effective. The universe is far grander, more attractive, and interesting. Scientists seem to have discovered all of this as well. Breaking free of evolutionary instincts that impede progress and understanding can be difficult. The same can be said of certain products of cultural evolution. For those impediments that are a product of both, like the idea of God, it's worse. Key reasons for our God obsessions, like our propensity for patternicity and biological adaptations that may make prospects for mankind's growing maturity seem bleak. Nevertheless, there is evidence, like with most of our elite scientists and certain successful cultures, ancient and modern, as well as a general decline of religiosity with the advance of civilization, that we can surpass and clear the haze of anthropomorphic projections. Realization and acceptance that we don't know things is a salient first step in science and in life in general.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we have a rich tradition, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, this is a little like paragraph I wrote, kind of a reflection on nature in the vein of Dolbach's system of nature. And sometimes, Holbach is not really anthropomorphizing nature, calling it her, but it is kind of an entity, unconscious entity. It's,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Well, it
from
is connected. I mean, like really connected globally. I mean, one section having something go real wrong definitely affects those around it. Yeah.
so nature is indifferent and unguided. It curses us as much as it blesses us. Yet there is nothing more powerful and amazing that can be found. It destroys its own creations, yet it produces and nurtures the most complex and magisterial phenomena, such as the human brain and consciousness, which permits nature to know itself. And few would say a great story is better left untold just because it ends. Nature plagues us with all manner of maladies, physical and psychological, including dangerous illusions made from the combination of its parts. Yet it holds within itself all verifiable answers and materials with which to transcend them and better ourselves and the world around us. It might even offer us the answers with which to transcend its destruction. While we are incomprehensibly small in nature's production, the brilliance of a diamond still shines, however small. I guess if it's not buried. But yeah, I gave that a shot.
No, that was good.
um, you want to read this? This is
Yeah.
a better world. Yeah.
Okay. A secular world doesn't guarantee a better one. However, I won't refrain from addressing the largest impediment to achieving one: religion. Just because there are others, the type of secular world that will be better is one that follows the key themes of the Enlightenment: humanism, science, reason, and progress. Every secular society that has followed this path, in contrast with others that have copied the worst aspects of religion, like Stalinist Russia, is far superior to its religious counterparts. As the world has gotten more secular, it has improved in every area. Look around the world today, in the most secular countries like Scandinavia, they are the healthiest, while the most religious are bastions of violence, disease, and poverty. There is little doubt that if secular democracy fell and Christianity regained the power it once had, the West would mirror the horror of today's Islamic theocracies in its own dark ages of the past. So yeah, that's why a godless secular constitution is important. Religion is a product of the infancy of our species, so even its valid insights and beneficial elements are tainted and awash in ignorance, false diagnoses, and tribalism. Instead of realizing our duty is to humanity in this world, we're told it's to an invisible master and a hypothesized other world. Instead of good reasons being the basis of our actions, it's obedience and faith. Instead of realizing that desire and sexuality are well springs of life, they are instead demonized. Instead of rational, evidence based education, childhood indoctrination is praised. Instead of facing reality so that we can better it, we're to remain eternal children. Instead of exploring human potential and the universe, we're told knowledge is vanity and humans are broken puppets of someone else's plan. Ooh, I got to say something about that when this is done. Instead of lives, souls are the locus of concern, and countless lives are focus of concern, and countless lives are sacrificed because of it. Instead of inching closer to actual prospects for immortality, science is regularly opposed. Instead of data and debate, conversion and conquest drive change. Harmless actions are harmful. Barbarism is excused, which is what is one not capable of if it believes one has God on one side. Instead of a morality based on our common humanity, we're taught sinful humanity is damned and non believers will burn forever. This doctrine alone will forever be anathema to human unity and progress. I imagine an ideal secular future would resemble that of Star Trek. Poverty and prejudice will largely be vanquished. Humanity will have come together exploring frontiers, internal and external. We will have finally realized that we are interconnected interdependent social species, and we can reach unknown horizons if we work together. Meaning and purpose will not need the support of lies and violence. Study will replace rituals and blood magic. Diligence and integrity will replace holiness and piety. Curiosity and wonder will take the place of worship. Scripture will give way to the whole universe and the whole of human learning. And man, that is just so true. And about that thing of, people getting mad at you, questioning things, I get asked so many times, so you think it's just all a big random mistake? How do you know that? And it.
What do you mean by mistake? That it wasn't intended
Well, like
by
that's
some conscious agent? Then that's a mistake. Yeah.
Yeah, like they think, they say, hey, you think this is all here just by luck? And I mean, they really can't handle it a lot of the times
It's
when
by natural laws.
I
People constantly have false dichotomies
Mhm.
in their head. They think it's this or that. It's like I forgot
Exactly.
what kind of fallacy, what the name of that fallacy, but I think it's a black and white fallacy or something like that. It has to be this or that.
Yeah,
No.
either or. It's
Yeah.
like no.
Like
Yes, like
it's non-random according to the fabric of how the universe works. Its
Mhm.
patterns, its laws. There is randomness in it, quite a bit of randomness, like in mutations. But then natural selection with evolution is completely non-random.
Yeah, but like it freaks some of them out that you would dare question that this was created by someone. And I mean, the thing is that in everything we've covered, it goes back to believers saying this is the most important decision you'll make. You have to make the right one. And yet they're making it based on no evidence at all, at least not repeatable, testable, and verifiable evidence. And
Right.
that shows how religion really does damage critical thinking. And I don't mean that as an insult or like I'm smarter than any believer in total. On certain subjects, I think I am. But guess what? On certain subjects, they're way smarter than me. A Christian engineer is going to build a much better bridge than me, okay? But that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean God, his God of choice is right and my atheism is wrong. Just
Right.
wild, man.
Ask an atheist. Have you seen or read The Case for Christ? No, but I read all about it. I've seen the movie too. It's the story of a supposedly good journalist who never gives a good or solid reason why he was an atheist, whose supposed one-time atheism is highly questionable. It's him going around and asking only religious believers, never critical scholars or skeptics, about the resurrection, and just believing everything they spew, and then becomes a believer.
Yeah, that's it.
Why is there something better than nothing? When we touch this, but there maybe have to be something. Nothingness, pure nothingness, is hypothetical, and its possibility is not demonstrated.
Mhm.
Something may be a more natural state than nothing. We can't even really grasp what nothingness is. Nothingness in terms of empty space is already full of particles. Uh, if you invoke a deity, presumably that's something far more complicated than the universe. The
Mhm.
question still applies to it. It seems absurd that a single deity, which is there alone and bored forever before his experiments, makes more sense that the universe has always existed in some form, and minds are things that emerge in universes, as science shows. If the universe hasn't always existed, it could have had a cause or not. The cause could be a quantum fluctuation or something natural. Laws of physics could be outside necessary elements to bring about a universe. Nothing in science shows we need any external help to exist. Then there are, of course, simulation theories. And ultimately, none of us can answer this completely as of now, and why would we think we could? We can notice that it's been one long story of natural explanations replacing supernatural ones. Where did matter come from? Matter is energy. E equals mc squared. They're convertible. We know our universe used to be very small, but we don't know if it always existed like that or in another state or if it started. If it started, it could have been a quantum. I'm repeating myself from just up there. Um, Energy could have always existed.
Mhm.
It can be a cyclical universe.
But saying something
Stephen
like
Hawking said all you need is something like gravity, and universes can
yeah,
naturally
exactly,
form.
and
Coolness.
believer gets really weird with you when you say something like that could have always existed, but has no qualms when they say it themselves about a deity. Just
Mm-hmm.
it's very poor reasoning.
Isn't it better to feel you're being watched over? Not exactly, but there have been about 108 billion people that have ever existed. If the many worlds interpretation of quantum physics isn't correct, then there aren't endless versions of each person. There are 7 billion people alive today, but who knows what other life is out there in the universe or others? there's an even greater number of people, combinations of DNA that could exist in our world but never will be born through our random process of reproduction. How absurd to think there's some master watching and toying with and speaking to and maneuvering with each one and taking notes and attendance. It's just patently ridiculous when you think about it.
Mm-hmm. And
Um,
and if he knows everything that's going to happen and it's all part of a plan, why are there so many miscarriages? What's the point of that when abortion is this ultimate sin? And how come when I have an orgasm trying to get a woman pregnant, why are there millions of little swimmers and not just one? I mean, come on,
yeah. If reason comes from our brains and our brains are evolved to survive, not to know truth, how can we trust reason? By testing it through experience and consensus. Clearly, our reason corresponds to reality somewhat. Look at what we've been able to do and build. The fact that we struggle intuitively with understanding the very big, fast, and small shows our brains did indeed evolve to survive, needing only to understand what we encountered on the everyday level,
Mm,
like trees and lines, not quantum physics.
yeah.
But there is also obviously great survival value in correctly understanding reality. If we didn't understand it well enough, we didn't correctly identify dangers and geography, etc., we die. Smarter organisms leave more offspring. We know of no mind that exists without a physical substrate, i.e., a brain, and entered in fatigued brains alter conscious experience and the corresponding brain function. Can
Hmm.
you prove there is no God? No, but there are all kinds of things. First, we need to define God, all the definitions, but there's all kinds of things which there is no good evidence for that we can't disprove, especially that which has been designed to be immune to disproof.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean we should just go believe anything because it can't be disproved. I look at God as a very problematic, full of holes hypothesis for the universe, which looks like an anthropomorphic projection of human experience onto the universe. No one can show any good evidence after all this time that a higher being exists, but a higher being could and would know what would convince each person, and a benevolent higher being would do so, and no free will would be violated.
Exactly. I mean, Karl Popper is someone who's not known enough, but I mean, he taught us that like not being able to disprove something, if that's part of the claim, it's not a strength. It's actually a very glaring weakness because when something could be disproven and has not been, you have much more of a reason to believe in it. It's like gravity. You could disprove it, but don't think it's very likely. And that's why most people believe it. I mean, if you don't, you're welcome to jump out of a window, as the old joke goes, and see how
Mm-hmm.
that works out for you. And be sure to pray on the way down.
Christianity and sexism. You want to get this one? We're
Yeah.
approaching the end now.
Okay. Christianity is not deeply sexist. The whole fall of humanity requiring for us a savior is blamed on a woman eating fruit and pursuing knowledge, for which we're told in scripture more than once relegates women to subjection and inferiority to men. There are many wonderfully shocking sexist gems in this holy book. Tertullian, Ter- how do you pronounce the name? Tertullian? Whoever called woman
Yeah.
the gate of hell, the devil's doorway, who should always wear rags and mourning garments in acknowledgement of her crime. St. John Chrysostom called women more harmful than any savage beast. Wow. St. Clement of Alexandria wrote that every woman should be overwhelmed with shame because of her gender. And the Church Council of Macon in 584 seriously debated the question of whether women could be considered fully human. John Scotus Erigena stated that at the end of the world, however, the female part of humanity will be eliminated, and that imperfection, that stain on the purity of creation, will be no more. Both Augustine and Aquinas declared that women are good for nothing but procreation and housekeeping. Early churches, both Gnostic and Orthodox, had many leaders advocating against asceticism, claiming that men could be saved or could attain true spirituality only through total avoidance of contact with women. That is psychotic. St. Augustine had labeled sexuality as the pipeline of original sin. St. Ambrose called marriage a crime against God because God had intended every person to maintain the state of virginity that came with birth. Tertullian called marriage an obscenity and a moral crime more dreadful than any punishment or death. There were churches in Syria that accepted only celibate men and refused to baptize any man who had ever been married. In 251, Bishop Cyprian of Carthage praised the currently spreading plague because it allowed Christian youths to die while still in a state of virginity. Ugh. The Council of Trent ruled that a person who even hinted that marriage might be more blessed than celibacy was a heretic and must be declared anathema. Pope Gregory the Great wrote that babies are born as the damned fruit of the lust of their parents. From the first, they are the offspring of hell. They are justly children of wrath because they are sinners. If they die unbaptized, they are condemned to everlasting torments for the guilt of their birth alone. Existence is itself a state of sin. That's very logical.
Yeah.
Pandemic faithful. All right. You want me to read this one?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Okay. A few questions for the churchgoers still congregating in the thousands, putting theirs and the lives of others at risk. Have you ever just looked around, clear-eyed, and seen and taken to heart that people are randomly afflicted by disease, violence, natural disaster, misfortune, regardless of their religious beliefs or lack thereof, their age, or their innocence? The worst places on earth are the most religious, with the most prayers emanating from them. Have you really understood that if you're standing under a falling tree, you're likely to die no matter your previous prayers? The universe is indifferent. We're unimaginably small in it, and that it's always trying to kill us. That it's people who care, and any progress made is due to people. That all our ancestors suffered far more horrible conditions and life expectancy. That rituals and prayers never changed this in hundreds of thousands of years. They were futile beyond serving as a placebo. Do you grasp that religious belief systems ascribe sickness to demons, curses, and the wrath of gods? And even more people were slaughtered because of this horrific comedy. That things only changed when Homo sapiens began to accurately identify reality through the tool of science, when we exchanged exorcists for doctors, the father of whom, Hippocrates, was the first to stop looking for supernatural causes of illness and approach medicine scientifically. Have you ever been to a children's cancer ward or seen the stats about the 5 million children under 5 years old that die every year? How about that 99.9% of all species that have ever lived are now extinct? If you think there's some heaven out there, then have you asked, why couldn't this world have been made a heaven? What wise and benevolent author would author all of this, and why would you worship it? The one supposedly responsible for your afflictions. Where does our salvation really lie? Down the path that has gone in bloody, futile circles for millennia, or the path that has consistently overtaken the answers of that other path and provided all the actual, tangible, testable progress our species has made? Very well said.
This one is this is the last slide. Questions for Christians, and there was too many of them to fit on the slide, so I'm going to see if I can pull them up, and I'll just go through them.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
1 second.
there's a lot, man.
Any closing comments before we get to this last one?
Man, this was a lot of fun. There's a lot of good information out there, a lot of good ideas and back and forth, man. I enjoyed it. I think the only thing I would like to add is that just we touched on it briefly, but really, if you're a believer and you're listening right now, and let's say you happen to choose Christianity, I want you to really right now close your eyes and try and imagine yourself worrying about the hell of any other religion. Can you honestly get yourself to worry about it? I don't think that you can. Really, just marinate on that. How worried are you about any other religion's punishment? When's the last time you really thought about it? When's the last time anyone told you to think about it? Ponder that. Really let it sink in. And it shows you that what you think is the one true religion is most likely just due to your geographical location at birth or what your parents themselves believe. Please just think on that. Please.
Okay, and this is the questions for Christians. And I'm going to kind of go through them. If you have any important comments, you want to answer one of them or make just a
I'll
point,
like
you do
raise my
that.
hand or something. Yeah.
So why do they say God loves unconditionally when there is an obvious condition? On what basis do you decide which part of the Bible is God's word and which are just allegories? Why doesn't God perform miracles anymore or talk to humans the way he used to in the Bible? What happened? Many theists from different religious beliefs believe they have a personal relationship with God, each having contradicting instructions from their God belief. Do you think they're all right? Is it possible they are all mistaken? How would one be able to find out?
Oh, that's something on that is too, is think of how many choices there are. And I can't remember who said this, but even if we knew one of them was true, it might have been Asimov that said this, everyone would have to assume they're going to hell just when you do the math. Look,
I think that was Bertrand Russell that said that.
yeah, but like 1 in 1,000, like let's just make it a nice even number. There's 1,000 different choices, and there's 1 in 1,000 that's correct. Everyone should assume they're done for.
Yeah. Many theists from different religious beliefs believe they have a personal. I did. Okay. Faith is a trick used by con artists. Why would a god require it? Why is faith such a good thing? Can you offer any examples of real world scenarios where faith was the preferred approach over actual knowledge? Is a human sacrifice that didn't really happen because the sacrifice was resurrected seem like something a creator of the universe would do? Do you find this idea necessary, noble, logical, good, or attractive? Also, God sacrificed himself to save us from himself. Um, do you believe it is part of your duty as a Christian to force others to abide by your beliefs? Or does your religion only dictate your behavior? Why? If a different God was proven um, to be true, would you renounce your Christianity and convert? If your salvation is dependent on understanding the Bible, why would one need scholars and special study to understand God's word? Why can't anyone just read the Bible and understand it? Why did God not speak clearly and undeniably as wise men do instead of thousands of years of Christians spilling rivers of each other's blood? Why is there nothing in the Bible that people of the time in which it was written couldn't have written? Why are many pages dedicated to instructions for animal sacrifice and prohibitions against foods and mixed fabric, which you likely don't abide by? Um, why is it so difficult to get the point across that secularism and government isn't an injustice toward religion, but a space that allows all beliefs to fairly exist? Government that is supported and is a government that is supported by and is supposed to represent all can't favor specific religions. Read history and read the horrific results. Read the American Constitution. Read James Madison's detached memoranda, which states even chaplains in the Congress and military violate said Constitution. If Adam and Eve had no idea of good and evil before eating the fruit, how could an all-knowing God rightfully condemn them? If God appeared before you and orders you to kill someone, would you do it? If life begins at conception, what do you make of the fact that 50% of all conceptions don't reach full term and spontaneously abort? Are sperm and eggs sacred? How do they reconcile the fact that Christianity borrowed the entire virgin birth, resurrected God man scheme?
Speaking of birth, too, someone made this point, maybe Sam, like what happens when it splits and becomes twins or triplets? Is that a half of a soul, a
Or they
third?
join together and become chimera.
Yeah, I mean, how does that work? Yeah.
Yeah. How do you explain how so many people become atheists after reading the Bible? Is Pope Frank correct that atheists go to heaven for living and acting right despite not believing? How do they account for the personal experience of those in other religions that has convinced them of the truth of those faiths? How can one claim to be certain about their own religion and yet dismiss the certainty of people of other faiths?
And And how do you disprove theirs or dismiss it without doing that to your own? Think about that. It's most likely because of, like I said earlier, it's what your parents believe and you trust them, and it's hard to throw away things you feel good about that mom and dad taught you. It's very difficult to
Mhm.
do. I think that's why religion always goes for the young people. Man, think about how many times in history they've been given, everything they want, and the demands always include going after children every time. It never fails.
Yeah. If one is unwilling to admit even the possibility that they are worshiping the wrong God, how can they reasonably expect others to do so? Why does God want to be worshipped or served? Is it simply because God thinks God deserves it? Or is it because God plans to redeem creation and make the world or universe more perfect? If the former, isn't that selfish and pointless? If the latter, then what about genuinely good atheists and non Christian theists who work toward the same goal?
Yeah, and like, what does
The,
that God get out of it? Like, if it can create a universe, what does me saying, "Hey, you're awesome"? What could that possibly do for a being that Come on, man.
so do those good people get a place in heaven? If not, why? And even if they aid the world toward the goal more than Christians, would a God deserve to be worshipped if it did exist, or deserve to be fought? What happens to free will in heaven after Judgment Day? Was Satan consigned to the abyss? Is it no longer required? Can anyone still sin or disobey at that point? Um, yeah, some of this I've covered, but where did their God come from, and where did he go? Why won't it come show itself? Why does it write? Why doesn't it write another book? Why does science ever keep finding God unnecessary? Assuming they believe in the whole hellfire thing, how would they deal with a close family member or friend potentially burning for eternity? Um, when so many religions have similar books, how did you reach the conclusion that the Bible is God's word? Um, are you aware of the dark, bloody, random history of your religion? Written and edited by and decided on men and councils. Why does the history look so natural and unspecial, spread by the sword and force, just as, for example, Islam? How do you, and is it good that you do, rationalize and justify the contradictions and evil in your holy book? How do you not find the character of Yahweh an incoherent mess, a monster, an obvious tribal desert war god, worse than any 10 psychopaths and evil people put together, times a
Mhm.
thousand? Why isn't all perfect, all knowing and all powerful God ultimately not responsible for everything? If a parent allows their child to play with razors, is the parent not responsible? Um,
Or like this, like when Moses and the boys, as we talked about earlier in Numbers, took like everybody they didn't kill, young women as plunder. Was that like divinely ordained sex trafficking? Was it just barbaric men being men and lying about their motivations? I mean, what do you think is more likely? That the God of love wants you to kill people and kidnap women and sex traffic them? Or just these are barbaric men who saw something they wanted and took it? What's more likely to be the truth? I mean, really.
there are all kinds of things one could mean by God, all kinds of possible gods. Do you really know clearly what you're talking about when you use the word God, something you've never seen? Is there not a big difference in claiming there's something one could call a God and a specific God who talks to you and you know its mind, nature, and intricate plans? Um, if a
Mhm.
God wanted people to be saved, why would it make itself inert and invisible and indistinguishable from nature and natural causes? Why would it compose a test and leave no or unclear or conflicting contradictory study material? How or why is this religious narrative meaningful or desirable? There could be many universes. Ours could have come from a larger one. Would there be a God for every universe? If there is other life in our enormous universe, is God hot from one planet to another, saving them and creating religions and sacrificing himself to himself in their image? Um, why is the history of discovery, ever more and more decentralizing and making humanity and Earth smaller and smaller in the scope of things?
Mhm.
How does God really make anything objective, such as morality? Wouldn't it just be the God's subjective opinion? Doesn't
Mhm.
God contradict himself and change his mind with contradictions between and within religions and their scriptures? Is might makes right good? If God does or asks for something, say concerning morality, for good reasons, why is God needed to underwrite those reasons, which humans can and have discovered for themselves? Is obedience to authority morality? Why the constant need to separate Old and New Testaments? Jesus said he upholds and fulfills the Old Testament, does not banish or discard it. He constantly refers back to the atrocities of the Old Testament as authoritative, and he also would be the same murderous, capricious God. Why did he change from being a serial killer and now is nice, except for the whole eternal hell part? Um, and again, we're covering some things that we've already covered, but
Except for the eternal hell part. I love
right.
that.
Um,
Oh no.
there, There's no evidence of the Old Testament Jewish takeover of Canaan, but if there were, how is this ironically any different from the Nazi takeover and slaughter of other lands? They also believe they had a divine mandate.
Mm-hmm.
When you pray, is it because God is unaware of what's happened or he doesn't know what is wrong? If he is all knowing and all is according to his plan, why are you asking him to change it? Why have prayer studies consistently shown they don't work? Why are the most religious places and countries where they pray the most poverty, disease, conflict, and natural disaster stricken?
I think it's because that's where religion thrives, though. And I mean, it's not to
Well,
pick
it's where the most prayers
on,
are. So why?
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not to pick on poor and unintelligent people, but if that's
I'm
where you're
sure.
brought up at, you're
Yeah.
most likely never going to escape it, especially if it's like, they're coming there giving you food and you have to sit through a sermon to get it. I mean, when you're weak and hungry, you're more likely to get preyed upon and it be successful. That's where they operate. It's just
Yeah.
it's that pitiful and scary.
Now, the Golden Rule is a great start, around in various forms long before the supposed time of Jesus, whose ethics in the Gospels are not argued for but backed up by a raw threat based on the imminent end of the world and not human flourishing and contradicted left and right. Um, but
He said,
the Golden Rule takes no account of human differences. When we consider what we would have done to us, others may not want that done to them. Turning the other cheek to a heartless adversary is just a guarantee of more suffering. Should the poor woman who envies her neighbor's wealth give what little she has to the rich? Should the masochist inflict pain on his neighbors?
mm-hmm.
A last one. Humans have advanced by thinking, questioning, testing, and learning. Should we abandon this with regards to religion? What is the track record of this kind of thinking? Unquestioning blind faith and obedience to authority and dogma through history.
And all of these questions, when they are allegedly answered, if they ever are, they're most
Right.
often just dodged or ignored completely.
Yep.
It's a very poor answer, and it usually is might makes right, or just because I say so, and you should believe it just in case. It's just, my heart goes out to people that are trapped in this because it does poison you in so many ways, and it's just, this is a
Yeah.
quote from Hitchens, and this is why I'm an atheist. This is me trying to just appeal to people's brains here and logic, but the only position that leaves me with no cognitive dissonance is atheism. It is not a creed. Death is certain, replacing both the siren song of paradise and the dread of hell. Life on this earth, with all its mystery and beauty and pain, is then to be lived far more intensely. We stumble and get up. We are sad, confident, insecure, feel loneliness and joy and love. There is nothing more, but I want nothing more. And when you really learn the lesson of that famous quote, I can't remember who said it, of everybody has two lives, and the second, or like, what is it, like the second one begins the moment you realize you only have one. And it's just so important to really take advantage of the tremendous opportunity you are given just by being alive. And I just want to highly
Yeah.
encourage people to not waste a single second of this one worrying about an imagined next one. There's no evidence for it. And why should we worry about something with no evidence? It would be like carrying a gun with silver bullets just in case you ran into a werewolf. That makes no sense. And it should take up no space in your inventory of your backpack. And those silver bullets of theism need to be pulled out of your head and thrown into the trash bin. That's just my appeal. I mean, I think they really need to.
And that, folks, is why atheism. And I'm sure there are points and arguments and evidence that we have not touched on. Um, I'm sure it's the same for you. For me, it was thing after thing after thing,
Mhm. Well,
and
especially bad
things don't
art.
stop coming.
There's just
Oh,
there's so many uppercuts you can land on it that it's just it is such a low hanging fruit, but it's such a dangerous and poisonous fruit that it still has to
yeah.
be plucked. I mean, it has to be plucked, man. Like us winning this argument when viewed logically is very easy. But the fact that so many people are still swayed by the other side is the real danger, the real issue. Because religion has affected education for much longer than just America. Even though we've been speaking about this from an American perspective, but if you go
Right.
back, I mean, imagine where we would be at right now if just from the time of Galileo, if religion would have gotten out of the way, where would we be? Just
Yeah, and
about that.
religion may have served some good, uniting people. It unites people only to divide people,
Yeah.
to unite people against other people. But we're in a global world now, and probably inevitably a global world, and it is a huge impediment.
Yeah. I mean,
So,
tribalism has no place anymore. Like when it was, you versus them defend your walls, and you
no,
saw that this current life was going to be real short, maybe the motivation of a next one could help. But I think we're way past castle sieges at this point. So maybe we can do a little bit better.
yeah. All right.
Mm-mm.
Well, again, this has been Paradigmatic Discussions number 9, Why Atheism. I think we did a pretty thorough and comprehensive job, although
Oh,
I'm sure, again, some stuff is left out. Um, Stay tuned for Iconic Atheist tomorrow. Man, it could be longer than this one. I don't know.
yeah. It
um,
always is.
yeah. But anyway, Scott, thank you for being on.
Hey,
It was
thanks for having
fun.
me on. I appreciate it. It's
Yeah,
always a good time.
absolutely.